Chapter 3102. A mountain peak that was thousands of feet tall stood alone in the night. In the belly of the mountain, there was a cave that had been dug by man. In the dark cave, a divine warship that was 100 feet long was parked. This was Lin Shui's warship. However, its size had shrunk 100 times. Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui, and the others each occupied a secret room and began to circulate their energy to heal their injuries. When they were on the way just now, everyone gathered in the meeting hall. Everyone's eyes were gathered on Yun Yao and Ji Ku. Looking at them up close, everyone could see their faces clearly and feel their unique temperaments. Immediately, everyone was even more shocked and envious, and they treated them as the perfect Jiuqian goddesses. Lin Shui was the first to lose it. She asked Ji Tianxing with a smile, "Young Master Tianxing, don't you plan to introduce these two beauties to everyone?" Ji Tianxing originally thought that everyone was well aware of this, so there was no need for him to do anything unnecessary. However, when Lin Shui mentioned it in front of everyone, Godlord Blood Illusion, Left Emissary Jean, and the others also nodded happily to express their anticipation. Thus, Ji Tianxing officially introduced Yun Yao and Ji Ku to everyone. After he finished the introduction, everyone was finally sure of their identities. Moreover, everyone knew that Yun Yao was Ji Tianxing's first wife and had given birth to a son and a daughter for him. The cute fairy-like girl that had appeared in the Bloodfire Kingdom's imperial city was their daughter, Ji Wushuang. As for their son, Ji Tianxing did not mention him. Everyone did not think too much about it. They only thought that Ji Wuhen was cultivating in seclusion in some divine artifact like Wushuang. After introducing Yin Yao and Ji Ku, Ji Tianxing introduced everyone to them. In this way, the two sides got to know each other. Yin Yao was very dignified and elegant, and she was also quite magnanimous. She also expressed her welcome and gratitude that everyone could trust Ji Tianxing and follow and help Ji Tianxing. From now on, we'll be friends and partners. We will share blessings and hardships together. Ji Ku also said a few simple words to greet everyone. Through this short period of time, Lin Shui, Zhan Hong, and the others could see the personalities of Yun Yao and Ji Ku. The two of them had very distinct personalities. One of them was dignified and elegant, like the bright moon in the ninth heaven. One of them was cheerful and lively, noble yet playful, like the scorching sun in the ninth heaven. All in all, Yun Yao and Ji Ku's perfect looks and bearing made everyone admire them very much. They also felt a little ashamed of their inferiority. For the next few days, the divine warship remained hidden in the cave, not revealing any of its aura. Shui Lin, Zhan Hong, and the others were all healing their wounds in the secret chamber of the divine ship. As for Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku, they returned to the distorted space-time of the Jiuqian Tenju Tower. The time here was 50 times faster, so it was more convenient for them to recuperate in seclusion. Only 2 days had passed in the outside world, but they had been recuperating for more than 3 months. Their wounds were all healed, and they had recovered to their peak state. Then, Yun Yao and Ji Ku continued to cultivate and further improve their strength. Ji Tianxing took out the godhead fragments of the Hetian sect's experts and began to refine them. The god-bearing mountain range was as peaceful as ever. The ambush of the Hetian sect's experts on Ji Tianxing and the others didn't cause much of stir. After all, this operation was top secret, and only a few people knew about it. And when they were fighting fiercely in the god-burying mountain range, no one passed by or watched. Therefore, the billions of gods in the Bloodfire Divine Kingdom didn't know that Ji Tianxing had left. They also didn't know that he had created another miracle and destroyed the 13 experts of the Hetian sect. Only the major sects in the Bloodfire Divine Kingdom vaguely sensed that something was wrong. The Hetian sect, which had always maintained a transcendent status, suddenly became unusually low-key and restrained. Not only did they suspend many of their businesses, but they also withdrew countless elites. The entire Hetian sect was not as open and confident as before. They seemed to be very cautious. The leaders of the major sects sent out scouts and secret talks to investigate the Hethian sect. However, the Hethian sect protected the news extremely strictly. It could be said that not a drop of water leaked out. Even their defensive power was several times stronger than before. Logically speaking, the major sects should be disappointed that they didn't find out any information. However, the leaders of those forces were all extremely shrewd experts. They immediately realized that something must have happened to the Hethian sect. Moreover, it was an earth-shattering matter. The more strictly the Hethian sect protected the news, the more serious the matter was. However, no one knew what had happened to the Hethian sect or what had happened to them. Gradually, two sects couldn't hold back their doubts and suspicions and began to take action. They sent out some experts and elites to deliberately create trouble to test the Hethian sect's strength. According to the usual practice, the Hethian sect would never take them seriously and would directly counterattack. However, it was very strange this time. The Hethian sect actually swallowed their anger. The two sects became more and more unscrupulous, increasing the harassment and provocation. The results still didn't change. The Hethian sect continued to endure and even withdrew their defenses. After the news spread, the major sects all understood what was going on. Something big had indeed happened to the Hethian sect. The sect's strength was empty, and the experts had withered. Thus, the major sects turned into drooling beasts and began to nibble away at the Hethian sect's businesses and resources. Everyone knew that the Hethian sect was the #1 sect and had the most abundant resource reserves and wealth. If they could swallow this fat piece of meat, they could replace it and take advantage of the situation to rise. Therefore, the major sects were not willing to be outdone and did their best to snatch and divide. Of course, there was no lack of the second prince and the third prince's instructions. They had the support of the major sects behind them. So how could they let go of this excellent opportunity? At the same time, in the royal city of the Raging Flame Divine Country, in a magnificent palace, in a dimly lit secret room that was filled with divine power, a young man wearing a black robe with a golden dragon pattern was sitting in a 5-color divine pool filled with divine liquid. He closed his eyes and circulated his energy to heal his injuries. His palms were clasped together and his eyes were closed. His whole body emitted a noble and dignified aura. This was Prince Lien. After the battle with Ji Tianxing, he was also seriously injured and unable to fight again. He knew that he had failed and that his momentum was gone. Next, the Bloodfire Divine Country would usher in a huge change in strength. Thus, he quietly left the Bloodfire Divine Country and came to the royal city of the Raging Flame Divine Country, hiding there to heal his injuries. Many years ago, he had made arrangements for the Raging Flame Divine Country and carried out a series of schemes and plans. The current Raging Flame Divine Country not only had a large number of his trusted subordinates, but there were also a few powerful forces. Compared to his hometown, the Great Yin Empire, only the Raging Flame Divine Country and the Hethian sect's headquarters could be called his base. After more than a month of seclusion, his injuries had recovered by 50%. The hideous wounds all over his body had already healed and formed scabs. At this time, he was using some kind of divine art to heal his internal and bone injuries. Mobile version update website. Chapter 3103. Divine light surged in the secret room, and divine power was abundant like rain. Only Prince Lien was healing his wounds, and the secret room was very quiet. But at this moment, the pitch-black door of the secret room lit up with a dazzling golden light and let out a series of beeping sounds. Prince Lien, who was circulating his energy to heal his wounds, was immediately awakened. He knew that something big must have happened. Only the trusted guard guarding the door of the secret room would activate the array to inform him. Otherwise, no one would dare to rashly disturb him, as they would be sentenced to death. Prince Lien finished circulating his energy and waved his hand, sending out a dark green divine light that covered the stone door of the secret room. Whoosh! With a flash of green light, The array was activated, and the door of the secret room slowly opened. A tall god in golden armor, with a helmet covering his face, quickly walked into the secret chamber. This was a high divine lord, one of Prince Lien's trusted guards. He walked to the edge of the divine pool and stood respectfully. He bowed and reported, "This subordinate, Lien heir, greets your highness." "Lien heir, why have you disturbed this king?" Prince Lien looked at the golden-armored divine lord with a dignified gaze. His eyes were filled with anticipation, and the corner of his mouth hooked up into a sinister sneer. "Is there news from the god-burying mountain range?" The Lien heir hurriedly nodded and replied in a sonorous voice, "Your highness is right." This subordinate was about to report this matter. Hearing this, Prince Lien let out a long sigh of relief. He leaned against the edge of the divine pool in a relaxed posture and sneered with a smug face. "Ha ha! As expected, you didn't disappoint this king." This king used all the strength of the Bloodflame branch, a dozen divine lords, and even Longfen personally took action. Tian Xing, that little bee asterisk starred, no matter how capable he was, how could he not die? No matter how cunning and treacherous he is, how can he escape from this king's calculations? Prince Lien appeared to be very pleased with himself, as if he had a card up his sleeve. After a few cold laughs, he sighed with some depression and regret. "It's a pity that this king wasn't there and didn't see with my own eyes how he was blasted to pieces. It's a pity that I couldn't personally give him the final blow and send him to the Yellow Springs." The Lien heir stood respectfully, but when he heard Prince Lien's words, his expression immediately changed. His expression was very ugly, and his eyes were filled with anxiety and fear. Even his body couldn't help but tremble. But he could only stand there, not daring to interrupt Prince Lien. He could guess that Prince Lien was feeling proud of himself. How furious would he be after knowing the truth? At that time, he would see Prince Lien's humiliated and embarrassed side. He would definitely become the scapegoat to vent his anger. Even if he didn't lose his life, he would probably lose a layer of skin, right? At this moment, Prince Lien's gaze fell on him. He frowned in confusion and asked, "Lien heir, why are you shaking?" "Your Highness." The Lien heir's voice was hoarse as he replied, his body trembling even more. Prince Lien vaguely felt that something was wrong. With a gloomy expression, he asked, "Is there a problem? Speak." "Your Highness." The Lien heir swallowed a mouthful of saliva and mustered up a great deal of courage. His voice trembled as he said, "Just now, this subordinate received a message from Lord Longfen. Lord Longfen said that the plan this time." Prince Lien's expression immediately changed. His entire face was as black as the bottom of a pot. His eyes narrowed fiercely, flashing with a cold light. Although he had already guessed the answer, he still bellowed in a low voice, "Continue. What's the plan?" The Lien heir was so frightened by Prince Lien's anger that his face turned pale and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. But he still forced himself to hold on. With a heart that was unafraid of death, he continued. Lord Longfen said that they successfully ambushed Tianxing and his companions. But after fighting for an hour, they still failed in the end. Not only were all the elders and protectors killed by the enemy, even he himself. I'm afraid that it would be difficult for him to survive. The Lien heir used all his strength to finish speaking. Then, he lowered his head as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He closed his eyes and waited for death. The secret chamber was dead silent. Not a single sound could be heard. The expected rage and roar did not come. The Lien heir quietly raised his head and saw that Prince Lien was stunned. His body was stiff as he sat in the deity's pool. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot. He was so angry that it was twisted and the veins on his forehead were bulging. His eyes were fixed on the surface of the water, and he did not move for a long time. "It's over." The Lien heir was filled with despair and mourned silently in his heart. He knew very well that this news was a huge blow to Prince Lien. As expected, after a long time, Prince Lien came back to his senses. His eyes were bloodshot with anger as he roared in a hoarse voice. Why? Why did it fail? How could it have failed? What are those monarchs doing? Was Longfun's ninth-degree realm strength fake? So many monarchs, and they even set up an ambush in advance. How could they not kill a beast of a foreign race? Was he really that powerful? Was he sent by Hao Yin to be my enemy? Grand Prince Lien was so angry that he was about to go crazy. He erupted like a volcano. He clenched his fists so tightly that they creaked. He roared at the top of his lungs. Instantly, the entire secret chamber shook violently. The deity's lake that was 10 feet wide also splashed with colorful waves. Countless drops of deity's lake evaporated into a thick mist. Prince Lien's anger caused the entire deity's lake to boil. The Lien heir was scared out of his wits. He hurriedly knelt and kowtowed. With a sobbing voice, he advised, "Your Highness, please calm down. This is just a temporary loss. We will definitely take revenge. You are still injured. Please calm down." Prince Lien suddenly turned his head and glared at the Lien heir with bloodshot eyes. He was unable to restrain his anger and punched out. "Scram! You bastard! Do you really want to see me make a fool of myself?" With a muffled bang, the Lien heir was sent flying by the punch. Blood spurted out of his 7 orifices as he flew back dozens of feet. He smashed into the door of the secret chamber and rolled on the ground far away. However, after he stopped, he did not bother to check on his injuries. He hurriedly knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Prince Lien. "Thank you for sparing my life, Your Highness. I am so grateful." Prince Lien remained silent. He waved his hand and sent out a ray of divine light to close the door of the secret chamber. Bang! Only then did the Lien heir crawl up with lingering fear. He sat cross-legged on the ground and began to heal his injuries. The secret chamber fell in his silence. Prince Lien sat in the deity's lake like a stone statue. He gradually calmed down. He frowned and pondered. His eyes flashed with a cold light and murderous intent. After a few minutes, he finally closed his eyes and ended his contemplation. Longfin's operation failed. The Bloodflame Divine Kingdom's branch is considered destroyed. However, that bastard managed to escape this disaster. This means that his strength has increased again. Moreover, the lackeys that followed him were definitely capable as well. I cannot underestimate or be careless. I must give him my all. Furthermore, he had to kill him before he entered the Great Yin Empire. Otherwise, once he enters the Great Yin Empire, he will definitely cause a huge commotion. Chapter 3104. Outside the secret chamber was a dimly lit passageway. The Lien heir sat cross-legged on the ground, silently channeling to heal his injuries. At this moment, the sound of light footsteps could be heard, approaching from afar. The Lien heir immediately stopped channeling, opened his eyes, and turned to look. He saw a tall and burly figure in purple robes walking over from not far away. It was a middle-aged god who was as strong as a bear and was 20 feet tall. He wore an exquisite purple robe embroidered with golden patterns and dragon and elephant patterns. There was also a special emblem on his chest. This person's skin was purplish-black and his head was huge and hairless. His shiny scalp shone with a purple light in the darkness, and his bell-sized eyes shone with a cold light. He had a wide face and nose, and a flat and wide mouth. His aura was very strong, and he exuded a dignified aura. But at this moment, he was furious and his cheeks were contorted in anger, accompanied by surging killing intent. Seeing that the purple-robed Baldy had arrived, the Lien heir immediately stood up and bowed respectfully. Lien heir greets Sect Master Purple G. Although the Lien heir was one of Prince Lien's trusted guards, he was honored to have his original surname abolished and was given the surname Lien by Prince Lien. He was ranked second in terms of strength and status. This was a great honor. However, compared to this purple-robed Baldy, the Lien heir's status was still too low. Because this big Baldy was the sect master of the Raging Flames Divine Country. In the Raging Flames Divine Country, there were also 7 top sections. The Heavenly Union sect was also fully deserving of being the #1 faction with a transcendent status. The sect master, Purple G, glanced at the Lien heir and walked to the door of the secret chamber. He said solemnly, "I request to see the prince." The Lien heir nodded to show that he understood and said respectfully, "Please wait a moment, Lord Purple G. The prince is in a fit of anger. Please wait a moment." He had just been sent flying by Prince Lien and was afraid that the prince's anger had not subsided. If he went to touch the prince's head at this time and got punched again, he might not be able to keep his life. However, Sect Master Purple Extreme was very impatient. With a black face, he said in a deep voice, "Don't waste time. I have an extremely important matter." The Lien heir was very helpless and could only brace himself to step forward and report. "Reporting to your highness, Sect Master ZG requests an audience." Prince Lien's voice came from the secret chamber. "Let him in." Then, the door of the secret chamber slowly opened. Lien heir glanced over and saw Grand Prince Lien sitting in the deity's lake. His expression had returned to normal. Only then did he feel much more at ease. Sect Master ZG strode into the chamber and walked straight to the deity's pool, bowing to Grand Prince Lien. "Greetings, your highness." Grand Prince Lien waved his hand and shot out a divine light to close the door of the secret room. He stared at Sect Master ZG with a dignified gaze, asking in a low voice, "You've already received the news?" Sect Master ZG nodded and said with a sorrowful and indignant expression, "Long Fun is my junior brother and my only friend. No matter what methods that bastard Tianqing used, no matter how strong he was still able to defeat him. Since he killed Long Fun, he is my mortal enemy. I will personally lead the experts of my sect and charge into the God-burying mountain range to tear that bastard into pieces." Sect Master ZG's emotions were very agitated and his tone was indignant. His entire body was filled with killing intent that soared to the heavens. Grand Prince Lien frowned and said calmly, "ZG, of course I know that you and Long Fun are as close as brothers. It's normal for you to want to avenge Long Fun. However, Long Fun and the 12 divine lords under him were all killed by Tianqing. It can be seen that the brat's strength far exceeds our expectations. He must have some unknown methods and secrets. Even if you lead the protectors and elders to kill him, you might not be able to defeat him, let alone kill him." Sect Master ZG said firmly, "I believe that although that brat killed Long Fun, it was definitely not an easy victory. He must be severely injured as well. The God-bearing mountain range is extremely dangerous. That brat definitely won't dare to continue traversing and will most likely hide in the God-burying mountain range to recuperate. At this time, if I lead the experts of my sect to find him, he will definitely die." Grand Prince Lien nodded slightly and said, "That's right. Your analysis is very reasonable. However, the God-bearing mountain range is vast, and that brat is extremely cautious and cunning. Where are you going to find him? If you split up and search, and he catches the opportunity, you might be defeated one by one. Have you considered these problems?" This, Sect Master ZG was speechless and revealed an awkward expression. He had just received the news of Long Fun's death and was furious and sorrowful. He hurriedly rushed to see Grand Prince Lien. How could he have the time to consider so much? Grand Prince Lien continued, "ZG, I can understand your feelings. How could I not want to grind his bones and scatter his ashes? However, we have already failed twice. We should learn from our experience and not act rashly again. Otherwise, not only will we not achieve our goal, we will also become more and more passive." Sect Master ZG pursed his lips and said with a nod, "Your Highness is right. This subordinate indeed lacked consideration. I believe your Highness already has a countermeasure. This subordinate is willing to hear the details." Grand Prince Lien's expression was solemn as he said in a solemn tone, "The God-burying mountain range is vast and dangerous. It is not suitable to be a battlefield. Only the raging flame divine kingdom, under our control and surveillance, is an excellent battlefield and also his burial ground. This time, I will gather all my strength and weave an inescapable net, condense a god-slaying sword, and give him a fatal blow. Once we strike, we can only succeed. Failure is not allowed." Sect Master ZG was infected by his powerful aura, and his eyes lit up. He nodded heavily and said, "Your Highness is far-sighted. We will definitely succeed in one strike." Grand Prince Lien waved his hand and instructed, "You may leave. Wait for my orders in peace." Sect Master ZG acknowledged the order and asked again, "Your Highness, are you really not planning to send people to the periphery of the god-burying mountain range to intercept and kill that brat? What if we meet him while waiting for him, and he is seriously injured?" Grand Prince Lien sneered. "This chance is very slim. He is not that stupid. However, I will arrange for people from Sacred Fire Sect and Surging Wave Palace to ambush at the periphery of the god-burying mountain range. If there is a chance to kill him, that would be for the best. Even if there is no chance to kill him, we can still monitor his movements and traces." Sect Master ZG breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed. "Your Highness is indeed wise. You have long grasped the overall situation and are far-sighted." After a few words of flattery, Sect Master ZG bowed and left the secret chamber. Only Grand Prince Lien was left in the secret chamber. Silence was restored. He took out several transmission jade slips and entered several orders into them, sending them to different people. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The jade slips transformed into several rays of light and quickly disappeared. Grand Prince Lien murmured expressionlessly, "It is fine if I don't attack, but once I do, I can only use my full strength. I hope that the Raging Flame Divine Kingdom will be his burial ground. We must not let him cross the Raging Flame Divine Kingdom and enter the Great Yin Empire." Chapter 3105. Unknowingly, half a month passed. After 15 days of circulating energy and healing, Lin Shui, Zhan Hong, and the rest's injuries were basically no longer a problem. Everyone finished healing and headed to the Divine Ship's meeting hall to gather. Yun Yao and Ji Ku were still in the distorted space-time of the Divine Pagoda, silently cultivating in seclusion. With incomparably rich resources and the replenishment of the Blood Flame Sacred Tree's power, their strength improved very quickly. Half a month had passed in the outside world, but they had already cultivated in the distorted space-time for 2 years. It was the same for Ji Tianxing. In these 2 years, he had completely refined the Godhead fragments of more than 10 heavenly sect experts. Not only had he absorbed a massive amount of divine power, he had also refined 29 types of divine Tao laws. These 29 types of laws were basically divine Tao laws that only divine lords could cultivate. More than half of them came from Long Fun. The divine Tao laws that the other 12 divine lords had mastered were mostly of lower grades, and their effects and power were not too outstanding. Only the divine Tao laws that Long Fun had mastered were of a higher grade, and their power and effects were extraordinary. This greatly benefited Ji Tianxing, and his harvest was rather bountiful. Currently, the number of divine Tao laws that he had mastered had reached more than 280. This was an extremely terrifying number. Throughout the entire Great Yin Empire, there was no expert who could master so many divine Tao laws. In fact, those with more than 200 types of laws were as rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. In Ji Tianxing's memory, in the divine world 1,000 years ago, generally, only divine king experts would master more than 200 types of divine Tao laws. In this era, even if the overall standard was higher than back then, there would not be too much of a difference. 280 types of laws is almost comparable to a first or second level divine king expert. My current combat strength has increased by about 3 times compared to before. It's a pity that I didn't take advantage of the opportunity to break through to the 7th stage and become a high-ranking divine lord. Otherwise, I should be invincible below the divine king level. Ji Tianxing ended his cultivation and muttered to himself, feeling somewhat regretful. But he also understood that his strength was too terrifying, and it was harder for him to break through compared to other divine lords. If he did not have too great of an opportunity, it would probably be very difficult for him to step into the 7th stage and become a high-ranking divine lord. He calculated the time, and everyone's injuries should have recovered. So he left the distorted space-time. Shwa! With a flash of light, Ji Tianxing returned to the secret chamber. He put away the 9 heavens, 10 absolutes pagoda, and left the secret room, heading to the meeting hall alone. Yun Yao and Ji Ku were still at a critical juncture of their cultivation, so it was not appropriate for them to come out for the time being. When Ji Tianxing arrived at the meeting hall, Shui Lin, Zhen Hong, and Shui Huan were already waiting for him. When he stepped into the hall, everyone's eyes gathered on him, carefully sizing him up. Ji Tianxing stood in the middle of the hall. Seeing everyone staring at him, he couldn't help but touch his cheeks and straighten his clothes. Is there a flower on my face? Or did he wear the wrong clothes? Why are you all staring at me like that? Everyone chuckled when they heard this teasing. Shui Lin stared at him with burning eyes and asked curiously, "Kid, why do I feel that your strength has increased a lot?" Zhen Hong also nodded and said in agreement, "Young master's strength and aura are unfathomable and unpredictable. After recuperating in seclusion this time, your strength has become as vast as the sky and as vast as the stars." Left Emissary Jean smiled and said jokingly, "Young master, don't tell me you broke through another cultivation level. If you break through one cultivation level every month, you will become a divine king when we enter the Great Yin Empire. By then, you'll be able to dominate the entire Great Yin Empire and sit firmly on the throne." In the outside world, such words were taboo and could even be punished for a serious crime. Left Emissary Jean would never speak carelessly under normal circumstances. However, this was Shui Lin's divine battleship, and they were all friends who had gone through life and death battles together. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said with a smile, "Break through one cultivation level every month? How can it be so exaggerated? If such a monster really appeared, he would definitely become the public enemy of the entire world. As for the throne of the Great Yin Empire, already becoming a divine king powerhouse, who would still set their sights on a mere throne. You should set your sights on the entire Tianbei region and become the region lord who rules over thousands of gods. You should even dominate the entire boundless heaven continent and become the overlord who rules over the entire continent." The meeting hall fell silent instantly. Everyone's eyes widened as they stared at Ji Tianxing dumbfoundedly, as if they were petrified. Obviously, to Ji Tianxing, this joke was nothing out of the ordinary. But to the crowd, it was an unimaginable and shocking heroic statement. What Tianbei region lord? What boundless heaven continent overlord? These were all levels that no one dared to come into contact with, and simply did not dare to imagine. The entire Great Yin Empire was already vast enough for everyone. To be able to become the emperor of the Great Yin Empire was already a great figure. After a long time, everyone came back to their senses and gasped, exclaiming and lamenting, "Oh my God, you really dare to say that? Aren't you afraid of great heaven's punishment?" Shui Lin looked at him in amazement and could not help but pat him on the shoulder. "Young master is really the world's #1 madman. We can't even look up to you." Sir God Blood Illusion could not help applauding and praising. Left Emissary Jean and Right Emissary Blood Dragon even raised their thumbs, revealing expressions of deep admiration. When can we be like young master and have the courage to say such bold words? Even if we die, we will have no regrets. Seeing that everyone was so emotional, Ji Tianxing sighed silently. "Sigh, if you don't even have this bit of insight and courage, how far can you follow me in the future?" Only Zhen Hong did not speak, although she was also so excited that her pretty face was flushed red and her blood was boiling from the shock. However, she looked at Ji Tianxing with a heart full of admiration and strong expectations in her heart. She said in a firm tone, "I believe that with young master's talent, you will be able to realize these bold words very soon. If I can follow young master and see the scenery of Tianbei region and the boundless heaven continent, it will be the luckiest thing in my life." Hearing these words and seeing her look like a fanatical fan, Shui Lin could not help but hold her forehead and sigh. Sigh, this girl is really hopelessly infatuated. Ji Tianxing raised his hand and motioned for everyone to be quiet. He said, "All right, everyone's injuries have more or less recovered. Let's set off." Left emissary Jean and right emissary Blood Dragon acknowledged the order and hurriedly left the hall to operate the divine ship. But Xuelin, Zhen Hong, Blood Illusion, and the rest were not in a hurry to leave. They all surrounded Ji Tianxing and asked what was going on with Tianbei region and the Boundless Heaven continent. Kid, you're not from the Great Yin Empire, right? Are you from Tianbei region? Young master, can you tell us about the situation of Tianbei region and the Boundless Heaven continent? Young master, to us, a divine king is the most unattainable powerhouse and important figure. But you don't seem to have much reaction to a divine king. Could it be that you have seen a divine king powerhouse? Chapter 3106. Lin Shui and Zhen Hong trio's words made Ji Tianxing somewhat at a loss whether to laugh or cry. However, thinking about it, he felt relieved. Zhen Hong and God Lord Blood Illusion's range of activity was limited to the periphery of the Bloodfire Divine Kingdom and had never left the Great Yin Empire. Lin Shui was considered experienced and knowledgeable, but she only came to the Great Yin Empire from the Celestial Fate Empire and did not understand Tianbei region's situation. Of course, Ji Tianxing did not understand Tianbei region and Boundless Heaven continent situation either, but he had been investigating this matter all along and collecting relevant information. Regarding Tianbei region and Boundless Heaven continent setup, he still had some basic understanding. Since he had nothing to do, he explained to everyone. Tianbei region is located at the northernmost tip of the continent. Further north is the Sunset Sea region. That is the Sea Clan's territory. Tianbei region doesn't sound big, but in reality, it accommodates more than a dozen empires. Under the dozen empires, there are hundreds of divine kingdoms ruled, with trillions of divine spirits. According to my knowledge and memory, there are roughly only a scant few divine kings in a region. Normally, there are no more than 10. Furthermore, they are all low-rank divine kings. Middle-rank divine kings are abnormally rare. Lin Shui nodded to indicate that she understood and said, "So, we live in Tianbei region. Among the hundreds of divine kingdoms, there are only a few divine kings. No wonder we have never seen a divine king before. The Great Yin Empire also hasn't appeared for 1,000 years. Hearing you say so, Tianbei region is indeed very vast, beyond our imagination." Ji Tianxing said with a slight smile, "Tianbei region is very vast, but compared to the entire Boundless Heaven continent, it's nothing. After all, there are close to 100 regions on the entire continent. Each region's area and population are no less than Tianbei region. Looking at the entire Boundless Heaven continent, divine king powerhouses are also less than 1,000. I vaguely remember that 1,000 years ago, there seemed to be only 600 over divine kings. But now, there's no way to know how many divine kings there are. Among those few hundred divine kings, 70% are low-ranked divine kings, 25% are middle-ranked divine kings. As for high-ranked divine kings, at most, it's also only 5%. Lin Shui and God Lord Blood Illusion both revealed a look of amazement, very shocked and emotional. Zhen Hong was rather excited and agitated and could not resist asking, "Sir, how do you know so clearly? Could it be that you're a divine king's descendant? Or perhaps you come from a god king clan?" Ji Tianxing thought for a while and replied without changing his expression, "Neither. I'm just like million small." He said that he had studied many ancient books to find this information. Oh, Masahiro nodded to indicate that he understood. She still wanted to pursue a few more questions. Lin Shui hurriedly rushed to ask, "Tianxing, hearing what you said earlier, are there only divine king powerhouses on the Boundless Heaven continent? Then why was the overlord of the continent called the Azura God Emperor by the statues erected in the city squares? Was God Emperor a kind of honorable title, or was an even more profound realm of the divine Tao? Is there an even stronger realm above divine king?" When the words Shura God Emperor were mentioned, Ji Tianxing's body stiffened, and an imperceptible cold light flashed in his eyes. However, he remained calm and collected as he shook his head and said, "This question of yours has stumped me. This is also the secret that I have been pursuing and investigating all this time." Lin Shui frowned and thought for a while. She vaguely understood something. Jinhong asked again, full of doubts, "Sir, I have also thought before, what kind of world are we living in? Is there only the boundless heaven continent in this world? What is outside the continent? The mysterious and vast heavenly sea?" Ji Tianqing looked at her with a smile and said in a serious tone, "The questions that you have raised are also secrets that I am eager to know. By the way, did you often daydream in the past? Would you let your imagination run wild and fantasize about many illusory things?" Jinhong was stunned for a moment and nodded somewhat awkwardly. Lin Shui hurriedly teased, "This little girl indeed likes to daydream. However, what she is thinking about is not illusory, but the person in front of her." Jinhong's thoughts were exposed in public. Immediately, her pretty face turned red from neck to neck. She was so embarrassed that she could not control herself. Sir God Blood Illusion's expression did not change. He pretended that he did not understand anything and obediently played the part of the wooden background. Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and said to Lin Shui with a serious expression, "When we cultivate the divine path, it is the process of understanding heaven and earth, the universe, and the rules of Great Tao. The most precious quality is to meditate calmly and allow one's thoughts to wander. Think about the origin of heaven and earth, the origin of the universe, and the rules of Great Tao. Only gods who constantly think and explore diligently can aspire to the peak of the divine path. Therefore, don't tease Jinhong. Perhaps in the future, her divine path will far surpass yours." Lin Shui was lectured by him. She frowned in annoyance. However, Ji Tianqing's words were profound and very reasonable. She could not refute him. Jinhong and Sir God Blood Illusion were deep in thought. They nodded in admiration to express their agreement. Lin Shui was not convinced, but she could not do anything to Ji Tianqing. She could only change the topic. "Kid, why did you go to the Great Yin Empire to die for no reason? Was it because of this matter?" "What matter?" Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and asked despite knowing the answer. Lin Shui frowned and said, "What did you say just now? What is the place beyond the boundless heaven continent? What is the realm above the divine king? Did you go to the Great Yin Empire to investigate these secrets?" Ji Tianqing nodded without hesitation and said, "That's right." Lin Shui was shocked and looked at him in disbelief. She exclaimed, "Are you crazy? You went to the Great Yin Empire to die just to investigate these illusory things that have nothing to do with us?" Sir God Blood Illusion was also shocked. His eyes and expression were complicated. He respected Ji Tianqing and was willing to believe and follow him. However, he still could not understand Ji Tianqing's actions. Only Jinhong did not speak. His expression did not change much. It was as though in her heart, everything Ji Tianqing did was right. There was no need to ask for the reason. Ji Tianqing looked at Lin Shui and said seriously, "I'm not crazy. I'm more clear-headed than anyone else. First of all, the things I want to investigate are not illusory. These information and secrets are important to me. You might not understand, but I have my own secrets. Forgive me for not being able to tell you now. Secondly, I've only offended Prince Lian. I'm not trying to assassinate Great Yan's emperor. How is that suicide? Moreover, even if I really wanted to assassinate Great Yan's emperor, it's a sure thing. How would that suicide? Lin Shui, Sect Master Lin, this is my decision. I can't change it. If you think it's dangerous and don't want to die with me, I'll leave now. We'll go our separate ways. Don't worry, I won't force anyone to take the risk with me." Sir God Blood Illusion saw Ji Tianqing's serious expression and tone. He hastily tried to smooth things over and explained, "Young master, please calm down. Sect Master didn't mean that. You've misunderstood her. If you want to talk about sword-piercing the 9 heavens with more like-minded people, follow excellent reading literature on WeChat. Talk about life. Find confidence." Chapter 3107. Ji Tianqing ignored Godlord Blood Illusion's explanation and turned to leave. After a short while, he entered the secret chamber and meditated. Jinhong was a little worried and quickly went to comfort him. Only Lin Shui and Godlord Blood Illusion were left in the hall. The atmosphere was a little awkward. Lin Shui stomped her feet in anger and frowned. Umph. Damn brat. Why is he so arrogant and stubborn? What kind of person do you take me for? Do I look like someone who is afraid of death? I'm just worried about you. I'm afraid it'll be dangerous for you to go to the Great Fire Empire. You're taking my good intentions for granted. Lin Shui roared angrily. Godlord Blood Illusion quickly comforted her and asked her not to be angry. Unfortunately, Lin Shui did not listen and ignored his comforting words. She turned and went into the secret chamber and did not come out. Godlord Blood Illusion stood alone in the hall and could only smile bitterly. He had nothing to do, so he went to the control room of the Divine Vessel to chat with Left Emissary Jean and Blood Dragon, Right Emissary. Unexpectedly, the two of them were not focused on piloting the Divine Vessel and were even gossiping about what was going on. Godlord Blood Illusion then understood that the two of them had also heard the argument in the hall, but they could not hear it clearly. Seeing that the two of them were very interested and kept asking questions, Godlord Blood Illusion reprimanded them angrily. Focus on piloting the Divine Vessel. Why are you meddling in other people's business? Young Master Tianxing and our sect master are just bickering. Don't get involved blindly. If you really anger the two of you, who can bear it? Left Emissary Jean and Blood Dragon, Right Emissary, shrank their necks and kept quiet. The southern part of the God-burying mountain range was close to the border of the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom. Normally, there would be a large army stationed at the border of a divine kingdom or soldiers patrolling. However, this area was deserted. That was because the God-burying mountain range was between two divine kingdoms and was the best natural barrier. Ordinary people could not cross the God-burying mountain range and enter the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom. If someone really crossed the mountain range and entered the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom, they were experts that ordinary soldiers could not afford to offend. It would be useless to station or patrol. The Raging Flames Divine Kingdom had always done that and did not send a large army to guard the border. In the past 10,000 years, there had indeed not been any accidents. But today, from the moment the sun rose, a large number of gods appeared at the southern edge of the God-burying mountain range. At least 3,000 experts of the god race, dressed in two completely different uniforms, had arrived at the border. These experts were arrayed along the border, with one person stationed every 100 li, hiding in the forest or grassland. A total of over 3,000 people actually formed a defensive line that was over 300,000 miles long. The Protoss in fiery red armor and long robes were distributed in the eastern part of the defense line. As for the Protoss in ice blue armor or blue robes, they were hiding in the western part of the defensive line. Almost every expert had a special symbol embroidered on their sleeves and lapels, representing the forces they belonged to. More than 3,000 experts came from two major forces. One had the dark red symbol of rising flames, and the other had the azure symbol of surging waves. If there were any experts from the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom present, they would be able to recognize that these 3,000 experts were from the Sacred Fire Sect and the Surging Waves Palace. All of them were well-trained, displaying a firm will and rich experience in concealment. Within a short 2 hours, more than 3,000 experts had all hidden themselves. No matter if they were hiding underground, in the forest, or on the grassland, no one could see through them. At a glance, the border was as calm as ever. To the north was the majestic God-burying mountain range and dark green forests, and to the south was the vast grassland and land. At this moment, in a dark green forest on the western defensive line, a middle-aged God clan member dressed in purple robes was hiding in a towering ancient tree. He was meditating with his eyes closed. The tree hole inside the ancient tree was very wide, enough to accommodate 10 people. 4 middle-aged divine lords in fiery red armor were standing in a row, respectfully standing in a row. Sect Master, our sect's disciples are all in position. The concealment is complete. Someone cupped his hands and reported the situation. The middle-aged divine lord called Sect Master was the current sect master of the Sacred Fire Sect, Sheng Wuyin. His eyes were still closed, and he said expressionlessly, "Good. hold the defensive line. Once the target appears, do not act rashly. Immediately report back. Yes, Sect Master. The middle-aged divine lord who reported the news replied. Another middle-aged divine lord asked in confusion. Sect Master, we are following the young prince's orders to hide here and wait for Tianxing to appear. Are we really not going to do anything? Sheng Wuyin said calmly. We only need to follow the young prince's orders. The middle-aged divine lord with a mustache frowned and advised in a low voice. Sect Master, we naturally have to follow the young prince's orders. But we can't be so inflexible and only know how to follow orders. If we don't know how to be flexible, we will always be a second-rate sect. Look at the Surging Wave Palace. They used to be a second-rate sect, like us. But they are good at reading the young prince's mind, so they always exceed the quota and won the young prince's appreciation. Over the past decade, the Surging Wave Palace has received many benefits and been promoted by the young prince. As a result, the Surging Wave Palace has now become a first-rate sect in one of the 7 major sections. The Surging Wave Palace was ranked last among the 7 major sects of the Raging Flame Divine Country, but it was still a first-rate sect and had a higher status. The Sacred Fire sect was different. They were the best among the second-rate sects, and their power and status were second only to the Surging Wave Palace. But the Sacred Fire sect was still a second-rate sect and had been left in the dust by the Surging Wave Palace. Over the past few years, the people of the Surging Wave Palace have been very arrogant. Even when they met the disciples of the Sacred Fire sect, they would still be arrogant and haughty. Sheng Wuyin opened his eyes and glanced at the 4 divine lords. He asked, "Is that what all of you think?" The 4 middle-aged divine lords nodded in unison, feeling indignant at the injustice. Sect Master, you can't keep a low profile anymore. You have to do something big and make a great contribution. Over the past decade, the Surging Wave Palace's status has risen, and they are riding on our heads. Our disciples have a lot of complaints. In the past, we were on equal footing with the Surging Wave Palace, but now we are being bullied. Who could be convinced? Sect Master, I heard that the young prince hates Tianxing to the core and sees him as his mortal enemy. If we can kill Tianxing, it will be a great contribution. We will definitely surpass the Surging Wave Palace in one fell swoop. Sheng Wuyin frowned and said in a deep voice, Even Longfun was killed by that brat. What qualifications do we have to deal with him? The middle-aged divine lord with a handlebar mustache hurriedly explained, Sect Master, we are not fighting him head-on. We are just taking advantage of him. Everyone knows that that brat fought with the Bloody Flame Divine Country's Heavenly Union sect before. Although he won and even killed Longfun and over a dozen divine lords, he is not a god king. However, he was not a divine king powerhouse. If he killed 1,000 enemies, he would definitely suffer 800 casualties, and he would also be heavily injured. We have the advantage in numbers. As long as we can surround him, we will definitely be able to kill him. Taking a step back, even if we can't kill him, being able to capture him and send him to the young prince is also a great contribution. Chapter 3108. After listening to the 4 Sir God's advice, Sheng Wuyin frowned and pondered for a long time. He had seen the changes in the status of the Sacred Fire sect and the Surging Waves Palace all these years. He was also jealous of the Surging Waves Palace's trickery and despised the palace master's glib words in front of the young prince. However, it was an indisputable fact that the Surging Waves Palace was stronger and stronger than the Sacred Fire sect in all aspects. He had thought countless times about how to please the young prince and get more resources and benefits for the Sacred Fire sect. Unfortunately, the situation in the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom was very peaceful, and he had never found an opportunity. Now, the opportunity had finally come. There was a monster called Tianxing in the neighboring country. Not only did he kill all the experts of the Heavenly Sect, but he also made the young prince suffer a great loss and became the young prince's mortal enemy. Sheng Wuyin also knew that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. As long as he could kill Tianxing or trap him, it would be a great merit. After solving the young prince's problem, the Sacred Fire sect would soar and surpass the Surging Waves Palace would only be a matter of time. He almost wanted to nod and agree to this at the first moment. However, he had always been cautious. Even if the benefits were at stake, he had to consider the consequences. Tianqing could make the young prince suffer a great loss and kill all the experts of the heavenly sect. One could imagine how powerful he was. An expert of this level was still very scary, even if he was seriously injured. He was afraid that the experts of the Sacred Fire sect would not only fail to capture Tianqing, but also suffer heavy casualties. In that case, the Sacred Fire sect would be finished. The four Sir Gods saw that Sheng Wuyin was silent and were secretly anxious. They could not help but persuade him again. Sect Master, we know you have concerns and are worried about everyone's safety. However, as the saying goes, wealth comes from danger. If you don't take the risk, how can you ask for wealth? That's right. We have been idle all these years. We have skills but nowhere to use them. Now that we finally have an opportunity, if we don't take it, we will regret it for the rest of our lives. The people of the Surging Waves Palace can think of what we can think of. Sect Master, hurry up and make a decision. If the Surging Waves Palace snatches away our only chance to make a contribution, our Sacred Fire sect will never be able to stand out. Sect Leader, this is not only the wish of us four elders, but also the wish of many disciples. The four elders tried to persuade him one after another. It was indeed a bit noisy. Sheng Wuyin was a little upset. He was still hesitating at first, but he immediately made up his mind. Shut up, he coldly shouted with a dignified tone. The four elders immediately fell silent and looked at him nervously. Sheng Wuyin raised his head and looked at the four people with a dignified expression. He said in a low voice, "Pass down the order, tell everyone to be on guard. Once you find traces of that brat, immediately send out a signal to surround and intercept him. As long as you succeed in stopping that brat, I will reward you according to your merits. If you can capture that brat alive, I will reward you handsomely." Hearing these words, the four elders were all overjoyed, and they all revealed smiles on their faces. Sect Leader is wise. This subordinate obeys. I'll pass on the order right away. Sect Master, there's hope for the rise of our Sacred Fire sect. Three of them were overjoyed and hurriedly turned to pass on the message. Only the middle-aged Sir God with the handlebar mustache pondered for a moment before saying, "Everyone wait." He stopped the three elders who were about to leave and said to Sheng Wuyin, "Sect Leader, since you have decided to seize this opportunity, we can't just wait for him to come. We should take the initiative to attack and explore the inner parts of the God-burying mountain range to find traces of that brat. Only then can we seize the initiative. Otherwise, when we find that brat, the people from the Palace of Surging Waves will also interfere. What should we do then? If we really want to snatch the credit, I'm afraid we can't win against the Palace of Surging Waves." Hearing his words, the three elders were stunned for a moment before they turned to look at Sheng Wuyin. Obviously, they also felt that it made sense and hoped that Sheng Wuyin would make a decision. Sheng Wuyin frowned. He thought to himself that since he had to give it his all, he might as well give it his all. All right, then pass down the order. Each deacon will lead 50 disciples and form a team. A total of 30 teams will advance towards the God-burying mountain range at the same time. Each team will be separated by 500 miles. If there is any situation, we can look after each other. Sheng Wuyin adjusted the deployment, and the four elders hurriedly passed down the order. In a short while, more than 1,500 Sacred Fire sect disciples were divided into 30 teams and quietly entered the God-burying mountain range. Everyone was excited and vigilant as they searched the surroundings, ready to charge at any time. As for Sheng Wuyin and the four elders, they flew through the sky in stealth mode and monitored the movements within a radius of 20,000 miles. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. The people of the Sacred Fire sect had left the border and entered the God-burying mountain range for more than 10,000 miles. At the same time, at the border of the God-burying mountain range, the disciples of the Palace of Surging Waves were still hiding in the forest, grassland, and underground. In a certain cave, a dark divine light was shining. A middle-aged woman with a thin face and dark blue skin, wearing an ice blue dress, was sitting on an ice lotus platform with her eyes closed. 7 middle-aged god race people wearing ice blue armor were standing in the cave, their gazes focused on the middle-aged woman. Someone bowed and respectfully reported, "Palace Lord, things are as you expected. The people of the Sacred Fire sect did not guard the border and have entered the God-burying mountain range." Another burly man said in a loud voice, "Palace Lord, the Sacred Fire sect has been suppressed by us all these years. They have been looking for a chance to gain merit and gain the favor of the young prince. This is indeed the best opportunity to intercept Tianqing from the neighboring country. Is our sect really going to wait and see the Sacred Fire sect steal the credit?" A handsome youth with a cold face and a cold temperament also advised, "Palace Lord, we have surpassed the Sacred Fire sect in all aspects. We cannot fall behind them in this matter and cannot give them a chance to turn the tables. I am willing to lead 300 disciples into the God-burying mountain range and actively search for Tianqing's whereabouts." The other elders also echoed and asked for the sect master's permission. "Palace Lord, I am also willing to lead the elite disciples to search for Tianqing's whereabouts. Palace Lord, I am also willing to go." Hearing the elders' words, the Palace Lord of Surging Waves still had her eyes closed and appeared unusually calm. After the noisy crowd gradually quieted down, she said slowly, "The more anxious we are, the easier it is to make mistakes. We have already become one of the 7 major sects and are above the Sacred Fire sect. Why should we compete with them? Wouldn't that lower our status? Moreover, if that monstrous youth called Tianqing was so easy to deal with, how could he become the young prince's nemesis?" Hearing those words, the 7 elders all grew silent. The Palace Lord of Surging Waves continued, "The Sacred Fire sect is in such a hurry. Let them be the vanguard first." Chapter 3109. The night was so dark that one couldn't even see their fingers. There was no starlight in the sky either. The pitch-black divine ship was like a black shadow cutting through the night sky as it sped through the God-burying mountain range. Left Emissary Jean and Blood Dragon, Right Emissary, were focused on operating the divine ship. Looking at the dark sky ahead, Left Emissary Jean couldn't help but sigh. "We'll be out of the God-burying mountain range and enter the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom 50,000 miles south. I've never left the Bloody Flames Divine Kingdom in my life, so I don't know what the Raging Flames Divine Kingdom looks like. What's the difference between it and our Bloody Flames Divine Kingdom?" Blood Dragon, Right Emissary, chuckled. "They're all divine kingdoms under the rule of the Great Yin Empire. What's the difference? It's just a little more prosperous with more people and powerhouses." "That's true." Left Emissary Jean nodded and said with some emotion, "I've been traveling the God-burying mountain range for the past few days, and I've seen what a forbidden area is. We're attacked by divine beasts several times a day, and they're all at the Divine Lord realm. They move in groups. Fortunately, we're on a divine ship, and there are many powerhouses traveling with us. If we pass through this mountain range alone, we'll die 9 times out of 10. Blood Dragon, Right Emissary, smiled again and nodded. "So, without the protection of powerhouses, even a divine lord can't move an inch. It's impossible to travel all over the Great Yin Empire. Only powerhouses like the Sect Master and young Master Tianqing can leave the Great Yin Empire and travel all over the Northern Heaven region." The two were chatting and sighing in their hearts. At this moment, Left Emissary Jean suddenly frowned and said in a low voice, "Slow down. There seems to be a lot of divine beasts moving about 2,500 miles ahead." Blood Dragon, Right Emissary, was also vigilant. After releasing his divine sense to investigate, he said with a solemn expression, "Yes, I've detected 9 groups of divine beasts, close to 300 people. They seem to be searching for something." Left Emissary Jean said, without hesitation, "Slow down and stay hidden. I'll inform the Sect Master and young Master Tianqing." Blood Dragon, Right Emissary, frowned and chuckled. "Don't be nervous. I've already investigated. Those people aren't much of a threat. 80% of them are divine lords, and only a dozen or so divine lords, and they're all low-ranked divine lords. Even if they want to harm us, They can't even break through the defenses of the divine worship. They're not even as good as those blood-winged divine birds we encountered before. Left Emissary Jean nodded slightly. All right, then let's not inform sect leader and young Master Tianqing first. This place is close to the border of the raging flame divine country. We have to be vigilant. After the two of them came to an agreement, they cautiously piloted the divine warship and flew through the night sky. The distance between the two sides was constantly shrinking. For 1,000 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers, 2,000 kilometers, finally, when the distance between the two sides was only 1,000 kilometers. The 9 groups of gods seemed to have discovered the invisible divine warship, and they all gathered around it. They activated their powerful divine powers and unleashed their divine abilities and secret arts that blotted out the sun. Hundreds of divine powers and secret arts formed a sky full of blade, auras, and sword shadows. All kinds of divine beasts, meteors and light blades fell towards the divine battleship. The left emissary Jean and the blood dragon right emissary were not worried. Instead, they felt inexplicably excited and expectant. Their blood was boiling. A bunch of reckless fools. It's my loss if you can break through the defenses of the divine warship. Come on. The two had already fought together many times, and their actions were very coordinated. The left emissary Jean activated the divine cannons of the divine warship and bombarded the 9 groups of gods. The blood dragon right emissary activated the defensive array of the divine warship and condensed a blood-colored light shield on the surface of the divine warship. In the next moment, a series of loud bangs could be heard. The sky was full of blade, auras, sword shadows, and the radiance of divine spells ruthlessly bombarded the divine warship, bursting out fragments of divine light that blotted out the sky. The blood-colored light shield on the surface of the divine warship blocked all the attacks, and there was not even a crack on it. Then, sinister divine cannons extended from both sides and the bow of the divine warship, releasing destructive beams of light that bombarded the 9 groups of gods. Boom, boom, boom. Amidst the deafening explosions, more than 200 beams of light tore through the night sky and bombarded the gods. Half of the beams of light missed and blasted into the surrounding mountains and rivers. The mountains were blasted into ruins, and deep pits and ravines were blasted into the ground. Dust flew up and covered the sky. But the other half of the beams of light landed in the midst of the 9 groups of gods. Instantly, the gods dressed in fiery red robes and armor were thrown off their feet by the beams of light, their flesh and blood splattering everywhere. All sorts of shrill screams, painful roars, and angry curses exploded in the night sky. Without a doubt, the 9 groups of gods dressed in red were the disciples of the Sacred Fire sect. Most of the disciples were only at the 7th to 9th level of the celestial god realm. Only the deacons leading them had the strength of a divine lord. After this round of bombardment, more than 60 of the nearly 300 Sacred Fire sect disciples were killed on the spot, and more than 30 were seriously injured. Even with such heavy casualties, they were still unable to intimidate them. Instead, it aroused the ferocity of the Sacred Fire sect disciples, making them even braver as they charged toward the divine warship without any regard for their own safety. Kill! It's that divine warship. Stop it. Tianqing must be in that divine warship. As long as we stop him, the sect master will reward us handsomely. Everyone, don't worry. I've already sent out the signal. The other teams are coming to help immediately. The sect master and a few elders are holding the line at the back. We must not embarrass the Sacred Fire sect. The deacons in fiery red armor shouted at the top of their lungs to boost the morale of the disciples. They led the disciples in a charge, using their ultimate killing moves with all their might. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Divine spell light covered the sky and poured down like a flood, drowning Lin Shui's warship. The divine warship circled in the night sky, constantly adjusting its angle. The divine cannons shot out beams of divine power at the Sacred Fire sect disciples. Bam! 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 Countless divine spell light blasted the divine warship, creating deafening explosions. The divine warship trembled from the bombardment, and the blood-red light shield rippled and cracked. However, the blood dragon of the right kept controlling the array to repair the light shield's cracks and replenish its divine power. On the other side, another half of the hundreds of beams of light from the divine cannons hit the sacred fire sect disciples. Along with a series of muffled, rumbling noises, dazzling divine light blossomed from the crowd once again, and a rain of blood and corpses splashed all over the sky. In the blink of an eye, dozens of sacred fire sect disciples were blasted into nothingness by the divine cannons. The two sides went back and forth, exchanging 5 rounds and 10 breaths. When the sacred fire sect disciples rushed to the divine warship, 80% of them were dead or injured. Only about 50 people were still alive. The divine warship was unscathed. However, the blood-red light shield was full of cracks, and its power had weakened. But before the blood dragon of the right could repair the light shield, Sheng Wuyin and the 4 sacred fire sect elders had rushed to the divine warship and attacked. In the night sky, more than a dozen teams had received the signal and were rushing over at lightning speed. A moment later, the divine warship was surrounded by the sacred fire sect. Chapter 31:10. Heavenly Wind Dragon Saber. 9 Revolution, Starfall. Red Flame, Sacred Fire Badge. Sheng Wuyin and the 4 elders attacked the divine warship 100 miles away with their ultimate techniques. The 100-mile-long saber light, the earth-shattering saber light, and the mountain-sized Abijna light illuminated an area of a few hundred miles. A peerlessly terrifying wave of divine power, carrying with it the power to destroy everything, viciously struck the divine warship that was circling in the air. Bam! 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 Kacha! Kacha! First, there was a dull explosion. The divine warship was drowned by the 5-colored divine light. It swayed left and right on the verge of collapse. Then, the blood-red light shield protecting the divine warship was blasted into pieces. The blood-colored light shards fell from the sky. The divine warship was also sent flying, crashing into the ruins 100 miles away. At this critical moment, Left Emissary Jean could no longer use the divine cannon to attack the sacred fire sect disciples. He quickly helped the blood dragon emissary of the right to control the array to stabilize the divine warship. Just before it fell into the ruins, the divine warship finally stabilized and stopped in the night sky. Left Emissary Jean and the blood dragon emissary of the right heaved a sigh of relief. Phew! At least it didn't fall to the ground. A few upper-level divine lords attacked. Otherwise, it wouldn't be like this. Damn it! That group of people came prepared and specifically came to kill us. We can't deal with them. We can only inform the sect leader and young Master Tianxing. In an instant, the two communicated with their divine wills and decided to ask Lin Shui and Ji Tianxing to help. But just as Left Emissary Jean was about to wake them up, he found that Ji Tianxing had already left the divine warship and appeared in the night sky. When the divine warship was attacked and Sheng Wuyin and the 4 elders appeared, Ji Tianxing had already sensed them. Swoosh! He left the divine warship in a flash and stood proudly in the night sky. He looked to the south and saw Sheng Wuyin and 4 elders in fiery red armor in the night sky 100 miles away. He looked at them expressionlessly and stared at the insignia on their robes for a moment. Who are you? His face was dignified as he asked in a low voice. While he was sizing up the other party, Sheng Wuyin and the others were also sizing him up. The middle-aged elder with a mustache even took out a portrait and compared it with Ji Tianxing. After taking a closer look, the bearded elder nodded to Sheng Wuyin and transmitted his voice. Sect Master, we made the right bet. It's him. The mustached elder's tone was filled with unconcealable surprise and excitement. Sheng Wuyin slightly nodded, his sharp eyes fixed on Ji Tianxing as he sneered. You're indeed worthy of being the #1 genius of the Bloodfire Divine Country. You're really in high spirits. Tianxing, I've been waiting for you for a long time. Ji Tianxing frowned slightly as a cold light flashed in his eyes. You're Prince Lian's lackeys? Are you here on orders to kill me? Sheng Wuyin did not get angry. Instead, he sneered and said, You're not that stupid after all. That's right. I'm the sect master of the Sacred Fire sect. I've mobilized the entire sect to kill you. It can't be helped. Who asked you to be so blind as to offend the young prince? Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said contemptuously, Sacred Fire sect? I've only heard of the top forces like the Surging Waves Palace, the Seven Stars sect, and the Dual Blade sect. What's Sacred Fire sect? It must be a small, insignificant force. Ji Tianxing said it casually, but he did not know that his words had dealt a critical blow to Sheng Wuyin and the rest, especially the four elders. They were so ashamed and angry that they were trembling and almost vomiting blood. Bulsh asterisk T. What kind of top force is the Surging Waves Palace? Our Sacred Fire sect is as famous as the Surging Waves Palace. If you haven't heard of it, it can only mean that you're ignorant. Brat, it's useless for you to have a sharp tongue. I'm going to tear you into pieces. The four elders were furious, and they cursed with murderous intent. Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a playful smile as he vaguely understood something. He looked around and saw more than 50 Sacred Fire sect disciples in a sorry state. Further away in the night sky, there were more than a dozen teams rushing over from all directions. Finally, his gaze fell on Sheng Wuyin and the rest. He sneered contemptuously. Since you're Prince Lian's lackeys, you should know what happened to the Heavenly Union sect. To be honest, you little cats and dogs dare to come and kill me? I really admire your courage. Seeing that you're young and ignorant, I'll give you one chance. Back down obediently now, and I can spare your lives. These words were undoubtedly a great insult to Sheng Wuyin and the rest. The four elders were even more ashamed and resentful. Murderous intent surged from their bodies, and their eyes were dyed with a layer of blood. Sheng Wuyin sneered even more mockingly. Ha! Brat, stop bluffing. You're so tough on the outside, but weak on the inside. Do you still want to hide from my fiery eyes of truth? You've been seriously injured in the battle with the Heavenly Union sect. You're just an empty shell now. You can't even withstand a single blow. The four elders also sneered and reprimanded and humiliated him. Brat, you want to spare our lives, but we don't want to spare yours. Cut the crap. Kneel down and accept your death. Tianxing, I really want to thank you for being the stepping stone for our sect's rise. Little bastard, how do you want to die? Their voices echoed in the night sky, spreading for hundreds of miles. The 50 or so Sacred Fire sect disciples were also in high spirits and confidence. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. No wonder the Surging Wave Palace is one of the 7 major sects, and the Sacred Fire sect is unknown. Hearing this, the four elders were stunned. The bearded elder's face was gloomy, and he asked in a cold voice, Brat, what do you mean? Ji Tianxing couldn't help but roll his eyes. With your intelligence and ability, you want to revive the Sacred Fire sect? What a fool's dream. Sheng Wuyin and the four elders were enraged. They couldn't hold back their murderous intent anymore and attacked in anger. Brat, you're courting death. I'm going to kill you. If I don't cut you into pieces, how can I vent my anger? As they roared, Sheng Wuyin and the four elders used all their strength and used their ultimate killing moves. Heaven Lamenting Sacred Fireblade. Sheng Wuyin roared and released endless sacred fire, forming a giant blade that was 100 miles long and slashing at Ji Tianxing. The moment the sacred fire blade appeared, the night sky was lit up and the air was burned to nothing. The four elders also used their trump cards, releasing destructive divine art-light shadows. Ji Tianxing remained calm in the face of the siege of 5 high-level divine lords. He unhurriedly drew his Heaven's Burial sword and waved it to counterattack. Daylight Sword, Dragon Elephant Divine Fist. He punched out with his left fist, creating a mountain-sized dragon elephant phantom that smashed at the four elders. He waved the Burial of Heaven with his right hand, creating a blazing golden halo that was like the sun in the sky. At the same time, Lin Shui and Blood Illusion appeared in the night sky, helping Ji Tianxing to counterattack Sheng Wuyin and the others. Sword piercing the 9 heavens. Chapter 3111. Kaboom! The dark golden sun, with a radius of 100 miles, collided with the heaven sorrow sacred fire saber, creating a thunderous sound. This was a head-on confrontation between Ji Tianxing and Sheng Wuyin, a head-on collision with all their might. The people of Sacred Fire Sect all thought that Sheng Wuyin would definitely gain the upper hand. Even if he couldn't kill Ji Tianxing, he could at least severely injure him and force him to retreat. After all, Sheng Wuyin was an 8th-level Divine Lord expert, and his strength was very strong. And Ji Tianxing was so young, and his strength was unknown. Moreover, he had just fought a great battle with Heavenly Sect and must be seriously injured. What reason did Sheng Wuyin have to lose? However, the final result left everyone dumbfounded. They revealed an incomparably shocked expression. The golden sun and heaven sorrow sacred fire saber collapsed at the same time, bursting out golden light and sacred fire that blotted out the sky. However, that incomparably powerful strength chi sent Sheng Wuyin flying hundreds of kilometers away, crashing into the ruins of a collapsed mountain. Not only did he end up with a dusty face, but when he crawled out of the ruins, there was a lot of blood flowing out of his mouth and nose. Obviously, he was at a disadvantage in the clash, and his internal organs were injured. The disciples of Sacred Fire Sect were shocked to see this scene, and their confidence was severely damaged. Everyone couldn't help but have the same thought in their minds. Didn't they say that Tianxing was seriously injured? Why doesn't he look injured at all? Sect Master is so strong, but he can't beat Tianxing? Can we really kill him? Originally, the disciples of Sacred Fire Sect were full of confidence and confidence. Now that their confidence was severely damaged and their aura weakened rapidly, their combat power was, of course, greatly reduced. Especially the 4 elders, they were the most affected. Ji Tianxing's strong strength and domineering aura cast a shadow over their hearts. Lin Shui and Sir God-Blood Illusion attacked fiercely, and the 4 of them were forced to retreat without any strength to fight back. The 2 sides had only exchanged a few moves, but 2 elders had already been injured by the Bloodblade. One of their arms and one of their legs were cut off, and their blood scattered into the night sky. When the other 2 elders saw this scene, they were terrified. When they made their moves, they were hesitant and did not dare to fight with their lives on the line. Of course, their battle prowess was greatly reduced. As such, Shuolin and Sir God-Blood Illusion became even more ferocious, beating the 4 elders until they fled in a sorry state. Fortunately, more than 10 teams of Sacred Fire Sect disciples arrived in time. More than 500 disciples, led by 18 deacons, surrounded Ji Tianxing, Shuolin, Sir God-Blood Illusion, and the divine ship. They launched an aggressive siege. The battlefield had shrunk to a radius of about 100 miles. The divine battleships could not be fully deployed, and it was easy for them to accidentally injure their own people. Therefore, Shuolin put away the godly battleship. Zhen Hong, the left emissary Jin, and the Blood Dragon right emissary rushed out and attacked the disciples of the Sacred Fire Sect with murderous intent. Not only that, Ji Tianxing also opened the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda and released 2 divine beasts. Roar! An earth-shattering dragon tore through the night sky. The black dragon appeared with a torrent of black water. It pounced into the crowd ferociously and started a massacre. Swish, 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 swish. The moment Qian Yu appeared, its mountain-sized body released thousands of icicles that shot in all directions. Before this, Qian Yu and the Black Dragon had been cultivating in seclusion in the distorted space-time. Not long ago, they had broken through to the Sir God realm almost at the same time, and their powers had increased by several times. Now that their divine path foundations were stable, they could not hold back and were eager to find an opportunity to test their skills. Therefore, the moment they appeared, they gave it their all and stirred up a storm in the night sky. One sword light chills 19 states. At this moment, a clear roar was heard, and a ball of blazing white light appeared. Dressed in white, Bai Long's silver hair fluttered in the wind. He held the Source Stone Divine Sword in his right hand and stood in the night sky. Under the night sky, divine light shone on him, giving him an extraordinary temperament, as though he was a peerless sword master. But in the next moment, his extraordinary temperament was destroyed. More than 100 disciples of the Sacred Fire sect joined forces and unleashed their Abhijna light shadows that blotted out the sky. He was instantly filled with anger and cursed. "You little trash who don't know what's good for you. Watch how I deal with you." Bai Long used his teleportation divine ability and moved 10 miles away, narrowly avoiding the divine light shadows that filled the sky. Then, he let out a dragon roar that could pierce through metal and stone. He transformed into a 1,000-foot-long lightning dragon and pounced into the crowd. Bam! 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 The lightning flashing by Long wreaked havoc in the crowd, creating a terrifying hurricane that swept up countless broken limbs and corpses. A series of muffled sounds exploded, reverberating in the night sky. Just the two divine beasts and Bai Long had caused chaos and violence within a 300-mile radius. The heavenly god realm Sacred Fire sect disciples were extremely weak and could not withstand a single blow. Like wheat being reaped, they fell one after another and were smashed into pieces. Countless pieces of flesh and blood were thrown out. In addition to the fierce attacks of Zhen Hong, Left Emissary Jean and Blood Dragon, Right Emissary, the 500 Sacred Fire sect disciples found it even harder to resist and soon suffered heavy casualties. On the other side, Ji Tianxing and Sheng Wuyin had exchanged more than a dozen blows, and the outcome had already been decided. Sheng Wuyin's outcome was very tragic. Not only were his clothes tattered and his body covered in blood, but his hair was also messy and his face was dirty. His internal organs and meridians had suffered heavy injuries, and they had long since ruptured inch by inch. Even a dozen of his divine bones had been broken. He breathed heavily, and blood kept coming out of his nose and mouth. His entire face was a mess of flesh and blood. His divine power was rapidly weakening, and his combat power had also greatly decreased. At this time, Ji Tianxing's aura surged like a rainbow as he used his ultimate killer move, Galaxy River Break. Swish! Endless starlight formed a giant blade and slashed at Sheng Wuyin with a power that could destroy everything. Before the blade of light arrived, Sheng Wuyin's divine soul had already been locked, and he felt a strong sense of danger. The surrounding space also seemed to have frozen, making it difficult for him to move. Under such circumstances, he had no chance to dodge at all and could only block with all his might. "Sky melting Saint Fire!" Sheng Wuyin shouted angrily as endless Saint Fire burst out of his body and surrounded him, forming an indestructible fire shield. At the same time, he held the divine sword above his head with both hands and resisted the attack of the Starlight Blade. Kaboom! In the next moment, a thunderous boom exploded in the night sky. The Starlight Blade that was more than 10,000 feet long hit the Saint Fire Shield. The Saint Fire Shield that was more than 10,000 feet in radius was immediately smashed into pieces, and sparks flew all over the sky. There was also a dark red divine saber mixed in with the fragments of the flames. Apparently, Sheng Wuyin's divine sword had been knocked away and his shield had been shattered. He was immediately split in half from head to toe by the Starlight Blade. The two halves of the divine body fell into the night sky and spurted out divine blood all over the sky. Sheng Wuyin's divine body was destroyed by Ji Tianxing just like that. Countless disciples of the Sacred Fire sect revealed looks of shock and horror when they saw this scene. Their hearts instantly turned cold. Chapter 31:12. Sheng Wuyin had always been the spiritual leader of the Sacred Fire sect. Not only was he the founder of the Sacred Fire sect, but he was also the strongest. All the disciples admired and revered him greatly. So, when he gave the order to search for and attack Ji Tianxing, the disciples of the Sacred Fire sect immediately followed him. Many disciples gladly accepted the order and charged forward without any regard for their own safety. However, Sheng Wuyin's performance was beyond everyone's expectations and disappointed the disciples of the Sacred Fire sect. He had only exchanged a few moves with Ji Tianxing, but he had already been seriously injured and his divine body was destroyed. He was too weak, wasn't he? The difference in strength between him and Ji Tianxing was so big. Everyone found it hard to believe, and they were shocked. The battlefield was silent for a moment, and the disciples of the Sacred Fire sect were stunned. When they came back to their senses, they roared in pain and anger, or exclaimed in disbelief. In an instant, the combat power of the disciples of the Sacred Fire sect decreased sharply and their morale plummeted. They had already been slaughtered by Zhen Hong, Black Dragon, Qin Yu, and the others, and they had suffered heavy casualties. After the heavy blow of Sheng Wuyin's divine body being destroyed, the disciples were immediately defeated and ran away. Zhen Hong left emissary Jin, White Dragon, and the others took the opportunity to kill the disciples of the Sacred Fire sect. Xuelin and Sir Godblood Illusion also became more ferocious, injuring the four elders severely. They covered their heads and fled like rats. As for Sheng Wuyin, his fate was already sealed. After his divine body was destroyed, his godhead quickly went into the ground and tried to escape from the god-burying mountain range. The sky had been blocked by Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui, and the others. He could not escape at all. Only by traveling through the ground could he survive. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing had been staring at him the entire time. How could he possibly let him escape? Break the 8 barons! Ji Tianxing shouted coldly. He formed a divine art with both hands and manipulated the law of earth to perform a divine skill. Crack! The ruins within a radius of 1,000 miles instantly split into a few wide gullies, dividing the ruins into 8 pieces. Sheng Wuyin's escape route was cut off, blocked by 2 huge ravines. Before he could turn around and run away, the boundless power of the earth condensed into a giant palm with a radius of 100 miles and suddenly closed in. Shua, the dark yellow giant, grasped his godhead and flew out from the ground. As the giant palm flew into the sky, it continued to shrink and condense. When it arrived in front of Ji Tianxing, the huge palm had already shrunk to a radius of 3,000 feet. At the same time, the dark yellow soil and stone had condensed to the limit, turning into a translucent golden color. That was the sign of the laws of the earth being condensed to the limit. A dark red godhead, wreathed in blazing holy flames, was struggling desperately in the giant palm. Without another word, Ji Tianxing controlled the giant palm to crush the godhead. Cracking sounds rang out as Sheng Wuyin's godhead was crushed on the spot. An 8-stage realm upper divine monarch, a strong practitioner who had been famous for 10,000 years, had fallen just like that. Sheng Wuyin didn't even have the chance to admit defeat and beg for mercy before he was killed by Ji Tianxing. Of course, Ji Tianxing had given him a chance to live previously, but he didn't cherish it. Now that he had fallen into Ji Tianxing's hands, Ji Tianxing didn't waste any time and killed him directly. Shwa shwa shwa. The golden giant palm dissipated, and the 9 pieces of godhead fragments flew to Ji Tianxing, who kept them in his interspatial ring. Not far away, the 4 elders and many Sacred Fire sect disciples witnessed this scene with their own eyes. Instantly, everyone revealed a horrified expression, and their eyes were filled with horror. Our sect master has fallen. Heavens! Our sect master has actually been killed. Damn you, Tianxing, we'll fight it out with you. Avenge our sect master. Everyone, don't be rash. Preserving your strength is the most important thing. The night sky was filled with the cries and shouts of the Sacred Fire sect disciples. Everyone was filled with grief and indignation. Many disciples were so angry that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They subconsciously charged at Ji Tianxing, wanting to avenge Sheng Wuyin. However, more people were filled with horror, and they didn't even have the courage to take action. They were trembling with fear, and the thought of retreating rose in their hearts. They couldn't help but turn around and flee. At that moment, there were more than a dozen teams that were further away, and they were rushing over to provide support. The situation was very chaotic. Many wardens and disciples couldn't make up their minds. Sheng Wuyin was dead, and the only ones who were qualified to give orders were the 4 elders. However, Among the 4 elders, 2 of them had already been killed by Lin Shui and Sir God Blood Illusion, and the Godhead fragments were still scattered on the battlefield. The 2 elders who were lucky enough to survive were seriously injured, and they couldn't even take care of themselves. They tried their best to hold on, but they couldn't drag it on for long. Eventually, they couldn't escape death. Very soon, more than a dozen teams of Sacred Fire sect disciples arrived one after another, and they rushed into the battlefield with murderous intent. Zhenhong, left emissary Jin, Bai Long and the rest were besieged by the Sacred Fire sect disciples, and an intense fight broke out. The Sacred Fire sect disciples, who were seriously injured and in a sorry state, were suddenly caught in a dilemma. They had witnessed their sect leader being killed with their own eyes, and they had witnessed Ji Tianxing's valiant power. They didn't want to stay a moment longer, and they only wanted to escape from the battlefield. However, hundreds of reinforcements had just arrived, and they were imposing. If they were to escape in a sorry state, what would happen to the hundreds of disciples? After hesitating and struggling for a while, a few wardens finally came up with a countermeasure. We have already fought a battle, and everyone is injured. We have used up a lot of our divine power. Since the reinforcements have arrived, let them fight first. Let's recuperate for a while. The warden's orders were approved by more than 100 disciples who were lucky enough to survive. Everyone retreated to the edge of the battlefield, and as they observed the situation on the battlefield, they circulated their powers to heal their wounds. These people were very cunning, and they all had the same idea. If the reinforcements were strong enough to defeat Ji Tianxing and the rest, then they would join the battle. If the reinforcements couldn't withstand a single blow, then they would act according to the situation and be prepared to escape at any time. After Ji Tianxing killed Sheng Wuyin, he teleported to Lin Shui's side. He teamed up with Lin Shui and Sir God Blood Illusion to deal with the 2 elders who were lucky enough to survive. The 2 elders were already seriously injured, and their fighting power was weak. The moment he attacked, he decided the outcome of the battle with one punch. Both sides only exchanged 3 blows, and the 2 elders were killed on the spot. Not only were their bodies smashed to pieces, their godheads were also shattered into pieces. After dealing with the 4 elders, Ji Tianxing led Lin Shui and Sir God Blood Illusion to the last battlefield. This battlefield had the most people, and it had the most momentum and commotion. More than 700 Sacred Fire sect disciples were attacking Zhenhong, Bai Long, left emissary Jin, and the rest with all their might. Black Dragon and Qian Yu also revealed their true forms that were 100 miles long, and they fought fiercely in the night sky. Originally, both sides were evenly matched, but as Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui, and Sir God Blood Illusion joined the battle became a one-sided massacre. Especially Ji Tianxing and Lin Shui. They turned into 2 golden and blood-red hurricanes of death, and they swept across the battlefield wantonly. Everywhere they went, all obstacles were crushed. They were really invincible. Book Guesthouse Reading Website. Chapter 31:13. 7 divine lords and 2 divine beasts were fighting against more than 700 Sacred Fire sect disciples. The result of this battle, which had a huge disparity in numbers, was equally ridiculous. It was shocking. In less than 15 minutes, 80% of the 700 Sacred Fire sect disciples had been killed. Only 100 disciples and a few deacons were left alive. However, they were all injured and covered in blood. They looked miserable. The Sacred Fire sect disciples were leaderless and had fallen to such a state. Be it combat power or mental strength, they had completely collapsed. They cannot be bothered to take revenge for their sect master. They all turned and fled towards the south. The injured Sacred Fire sect disciples who had retreated to the edge of the battlefield to watch the battle had already turned and fled when they saw that the situation was not good. Hence, the Sacred Fire sect disciples split into 2 groups and fled. Ji Tianxing and company also split up to chase after them. Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui, and Divine Lord Blood Illusion chased after the first 100 people who fled. Zhenhong, left emissary Jin, Bai Long, and company chased after the last 100 disciples. The two parties engaged in a chase in the god-burying mountain range. Divine light streaked across the night sky and dispersed the darkness. After a while, Ji Tianxing and company caught up with the Sacred Fire Sect disciples and released their divine powers. Bam! 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 Shadows of divine spells and saber lights and sword lights that covered the sky poured down like a flood. After the flood, the number of Sacred Fire Sect disciples was reduced by more than half. Then, the second wave of divine powers poured down. The dozens of Sacred Fire Sect disciples who were lucky enough to survive also turned into ashes. They died without a complete corpse. In just a few seconds, the battle was over. Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui, and Divine Lord Blood Illusion turned around to intercept the second group of Sacred Fire Sect disciples. The outcome of these 100 disciples was even worse. Ji Tianxing and company intercepted them in front, and Zhenhong, Bai Long, and company chased after them from behind. They were pincered and had no chance of escaping. In the face of certain death, the willpower of many disciples collapsed, and they all laid down their weapons and surrendered. Zhenhong, left emissary Jin, Bai Long, and company stopped their attacks and looked at Ji Tianxing, waiting for his decision. Ji Tianxing raised his hand and was about to give the order. Shui Lin held the 10-meter-long blood saber and waved it, covering the sky with blood-red light blades, killing all the disciples of the Sacred Fire Sect. Swish! Swish! She performed 3 supreme saber techniques and released more than 2,000 blood blades, killing more than 100 Sacred Fire Sect disciples. The battle came to an end. The divine light that filled the sky gradually extinguished, and the night sky quieted down. Shui Lin put away the blood blade and flew back to Ji Tianxing's side, her expression unchanged. Zhenhong, left emissary Jin, White Dragon, and the others all looked at her strangely, as if they wanted to say something. You? Ji Tianxing also frowned, not knowing what to say. Shui Lin did not take it seriously. She glanced at the crowd calmly and said confidently, "Why are you looking at me? These people are all Prince Lian's lackeys. Shouldn't they be killed? If we are defeated and fall into their hands, do you think we can survive?" Everyone was silent and speechless. Zhenhong hesitated for a moment and said without confidence, But they have already surrendered. So what? Shui Lin rolled her eyes and said angrily, "If anyone wants to kill you, they can live by surrendering after they fail. Then your enemies will be endless. What's more, we are on the run and are in danger. We don't need captives." Zhenhong immediately quieted down and didn't say anything else. White Dragon nodded and said to Shui Lin seriously, "Sect Master Lin, what you said makes sense. We all agree, but we hope you won't make a decision on your own. After all, we are still following Master's will." Zhenhong quickly nodded. Black Dragon and Qianyu also echoed. Blood Illusion God, left emissary Jin, and Blood Dragon right emissary could only remain silent, although they also thought so in their hearts. After all, they were Shui Lin's former subordinates. How could they change their minds so quickly? Shui Lin did not feel embarrassed. She patted Ji Tianxing's shoulder and said to White Dragon, "You think too much. I will not steal your master's limelight and position. It's just that it's not appropriate for your master to kill the surrendered soldiers. It will affect his glorious image. I am a demoness and a devil. I don't care about my reputation. I will be the bad guy for him." White Dragon was speechless. Ahem. Ji Tianxing pretended to cough twice to break the awkward silence. He said expressionlessly, "Okay, don't just stand there. Let's clean up the battlefield. This is just the beginning. There are more dangerous things to come." Hearing his words, everyone hurriedly scattered in all directions to clean up the battlefield within 1,000 miles. In the previous battle, they had almost destroyed the Sacred Fire Sect. Not only did they kill the sect master, 4 elders, and 30 deacons, but they also killed more than 1,400 disciples of the Sacred Fire Sect. After everyone was killed, there would be Godhead fragments, space rings, and some divine weapons and equipment. Although each disciple did not accumulate much wealth, at most there would be hundreds of thousands of divine stones. At least, there would be tens of thousands of divine stones. But many a little makes a mickle. When the savings of more than 1,000 people were put together, it would be a shocking amount of wealth. Everyone split up and acted with high efficiency. In just 100 breaths' time, the battlefield was cleaned up. Everyone gathered together again. Ji Tianxing gained the most. Not only did he get the godhead fragments of Sheng Wuyin and the four elders, but he also got their space rings. He did a rough count. The wealth that Sheng Wuyin and the four elders had accumulated was at least 5 billion divine stones. Among them, there was a large amount of superpower scrolls, divine elixirs, and divine weapons and equipment. Xuelin, Sir Godblood Illusion, Zhan Hong, and the rest collected a large amount of divine weapons and space rings. Everyone was too lazy to check the exact number, so they let Ji Tianxing distribute. He only kept the godhead fragments of Sheng Wuyin and the four elders, dozens of upper monarch-level divine weapons, and hundreds of upper monarch-level elixirs. The remaining resources worth more than 4 billion were distributed to Xuelin, Zhenhong, White Dragon, and the rest. As for the more than 1,000 space rings and divine weapons, they were equally distributed to everyone. Even Qianyu and Black Dragon had a share. The result was naturally to everyone's satisfaction. Everyone had fought a great battle and made a windfall, so they felt that any risk was worth it. Even people like Xuelin, White Dragon, and Qianyu, who loved to fight, were looking forward to the next great battle. By then, they would make a windfall again. Just as everyone finished distributing the spoils and was having a heated discussion, 2 balls of dazzling divine light lit up the night sky in the south and came with boundless murderous intent. Swoosh! Swoosh! In a few breaths' time, the 2 balls of 5-color divine light came close. After the divine light faded, the figures of 8 divine lord powerhouses appeared. The leader was a middle-aged woman in an ice-blue dress. Her skin was dark blue and shimmering. She was sitting on the ice lotus seat. The other 7 Sir Gods were in ice-blue armor, and the same emblem was embroidered on their chests. Chapter 31:14. The 7 monarch god experts were all holding their weapons, eyeing them covetously. The middle-aged woman in the lead looked coldly at Ji Tianxing and the rest. Her purplish-black eyes flashed with a frightening cold light. She was emitting a terrifying cold air, causing the temperature within 1,000 miles to drop and snow to fall. Although she was silent, an invisible, murderous intent spread and covered 1,000 miles. Lin Shui, Bai Long, and the rest were silent. Everyone kept their spoils of war and drew their Kenshin weapons, looking at each other warily. These guys are not to be trifled with. Young Master Tianxing was right. Here comes another group of scoundrels trying to take advantage of the situation. Is this the case of the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind? It could also be the fisherman who benefits from the fight between the sandpiper and the clam. These guys are obviously stronger than Sacred Fire Sect. Which force could they be? Lin Shui, Bai Long, and the rest were discussing secretly. At this moment, Ji Tianxing sized up the other party and said with a calm expression, "Previously, the Sacred Fire Sect came to kill me, and then you guys appeared. If I'm not wrong, you guys are also Prince Lien's lackeys from Surging Waves Palace, right?" The woman in blue was not angry at all. She was as cold and sharp as an icicle. She looked at Ji Tianxing indifferently and said, "That's right. Surging Waves Palace is here on Little Prince's orders to kill these traitors. Since you've guessed my identity, you're Tianxing, right?" "That's me." Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a playful smile and said, "Surging Waves Palace is indeed smarter than Sacred Fire Sect. You know that I'm invincible and unpredictable, so I let Sacred Fire Sect come to their deaths first. Then you guys reap the benefits. It's a pity that you're late." The Lord of Surging Waves Palace was still expressionless as he said in a cold and deep voice, "It's not too late to kill you." "Ha, very confident." Ji Tianxing sneered as his sharp gaze swept past the Lord of Surging Waves Palace and the 7 elders. 1 8-stage realm peak, 3 7-stage realm peak, 2 7-stage realm, and 2 6-stage realm peak. Compared to the Sacred Fire Sect, it was indeed twice as strong. However, the 8 of you are far from enough. The 7 elders of Surging Wave Palace frowned. Their faces were filled with rage as they exuded killing intent. The palace master of the surging wave palace remained unmoved. He said expressionlessly, "What if we add in the elites of the surging wave palace?" As her voice fell, 20 dazzling balls of 5-color divine light lit up in the night sky in all directions. Within each ball of 5-color divine light, there were more than 70 surging water palace disciples led by a deacon. More than 20 teams, which added up to more than 1,500 people, surrounded them at lightning speed. In just a short moment, an encirclement with a radius of 500 miles was formed. The surging wave palace disciples spread out and got into formation, forming a gigantic trapping formation. The inescapable net was quickly formed, and it seemed that Ji, Tianxing, and the others could not escape. The 7 elders of the surging wave palace all revealed a complacent cold smile. The palace master of the surging wave palace looked sharply at Ji, Tianxing, and asked, "Is it enough now?" Ji, Tianxing shook his head and replied in a calm tone, "Still not enough. At most 1 hour, kill all of them." The 7 elders of the surging wave palace became even more infuriated. They could no longer suppress their anger as they started to reprimand him. "Lad, you're really too arrogant." "One arrogant lad? You probably don't know how the word death is written right." "Lad, a battle before a battle is not drinking tea and chatting. You're just making a joke out of your mouth." "Little beast, you're about to die, and you're still putting up a strong front? Do you think we'll fight a battle that we're not prepared for?" Seeing the 7 elders so indignant, Ji Tianxing gave a disdainful laugh. "Since you're so agitated, then this sovereign shall bestow upon you the most tragic way to die." The 7 elders were even more infuriated. All of them gritted their teeth and clenched their fists tightly as they were filled with murderous intent. However, since the Lord of Surging Wave did not give the order, they would not act rashly. The Lord of Surging Wave's gaze was like an icicle as he glared at Ji Tianxing and said in a deep voice, "Lad, very arrogant, but it's useless. The trap is set and you're dead for sure. Taking a step back, no matter how strong you are, I can still complete the mission as long as I surround you without killing you. You can say your last words now." Ji Tianxing chuckled. "Compared to Sacred Fire Sect's sect master, you're indeed smarter and calmer. However, you're only slightly stronger than him. Right now, you're treating me like a cicada, and Sacred Fire Sect is the mantis while you're the Oriole. However, who knows if you're not the Oriole or the mantis?" The Lord of Surging Wave raised his brow, and a cold glint flashed through his eyes as his lips curled into a mocking sneer. "Foo-foo, you're trying to get information out of me? I don't mind telling you the truth then. Sacred Fire Sect and Surging Wave Palace are only the vanguard. Outside the God Burial Mountain Range, there are even more butcher knives waiting to cut you into pieces. The Little Prince's methods and power are definitely not something you can imagine. Becoming mortal enemies with him is the stupidest decision of your life." Ever since the Lord of Surging Wave appeared, she had been expressionless and emotionless like ice. This was the first time her expression changed, and she actually revealed a cold smile. It was obvious that victory was already in her grasp, and she had a card up her sleeve. After hearing the Lord of Surging Wave's words, Ji Tianxing had an answer in his heart. The only factions that entered the God Burial Mountain Range with orders to kill him were Sacred Fire Sect and Surging Wave Palace. However, within the borders of the Raging Flame Divine Country, even the Prince and many other factions had set up an inescapable net, waiting for him to crawl in. Of course, that was all for the future. At least for now, after dealing with Surging Wave Palace, there would be no more worries. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and revealed a smile to the Lord of Surging Wave. "Although it's futile, I still have to remind you out of benevolence. If you retreat with the Surging Wave Palace disciples now, you can still live and protect the foundation of Surging Wave Palace. If you persist in your wrong ways, it'll be too late for regrets. An hour ago, I also gave the Sacred Fire Sect Master a chance. Unfortunately, he did not cherish it. You've also seen the outcome of Sacred Fire Sect." When they heard that, the 7 Surging Wave Palace elders were even more enraged and laughed out of anger. "Ha ha, what shameless boasting! Lad, stop acting. We've long seen through you. The more arrogant you act, the more it proves that you're anxious in your heart. You want to subdue us without a fight? Who do you think you are? Instead of spouting nonsense here, why don't you kneel down and beg for mercy? Perhaps you might even die a quick death." The Lord of Surging Wave narrowed her eyes, and her gaze turned even colder. She said coldly, "It's indeed beyond my expectations that you could kill everyone from Sacred Fire's sect. However, after killing repeatedly, how much strength do you have left? I have orders. No matter how eloquent your words are, it's useless. Your life, this consort will definitely take it." With that, the Lord of Surging Wave ordered in a sonorous tone, "Kill." The 7 elders and more than 1,000 disciples acknowledged the order in unison and roared as they waved their weapons and launched an attack. Seeing that, Ji Tianxing sighed softly. "Sigh, this is the stupidest decision you've made in your life." Chapter 31:15. Ji Tianxing's sigh could no longer be heard by the people from Palace of Surging Waves. They were already filled with anger and could not hold back their surging murderous intent. At Palace Lord Surging Wave's command, the 7 elders and over 1,000 disciples all unleashed their most powerful ultimate killer moves. Heavenly Wave's Saint Kill, Wild Wave's 7 Rolls, Violent Tide, 20% Cut, Xian Bing splitting 9 heavens. Everyone let out a low roar and released all kinds of Palace of Surging Waves' unique skills. In an instant, huge waves that were 10,000 feet tall, raging tides that were 100 miles wide, and huge ice sword that covered the sky within a 300-mile radius. Over 1,000 disciples from Palace of Surging Waves joined forces and formed a battle formation. They released tens of thousands of sharp blades of divine light that rained down on Ji Tianxing and the others. The gloomy night sky was once again illuminated by the snow-white light. The sky and earth within a 500-mile radius were filled with endless waves and huge ice swords. The temperature dropped to the lowest level. The vast land and the surrounding mountains and rivers cracked due to the extreme cold. The earth and rocks were crushed. The air was frozen like ice, and divine power could not circulate at all. In such an environment, Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui, and Sir Godblood Illusion were not affected. However, Zhen Hong, left emissary Jean by Long, and the others felt extremely pressured. It was as though their bodies were frozen and the circulation of divine power slowed down. Luckily, Ji Tianxing was prepared and had a countermeasure. When Palace Master of Surging Waves gave the order to attack, he also raised his palms and held his sword fingers and deity seal to release his trump card. Heaven Punishment Sword Formation. He used a supreme secret skill to communicate with the stars outside the region and sent down endless power of stars. Instantly, 20,000 huge swords appeared in the sky and rained down like a meteor shower. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. In the blink of an eye, the 20,000 huge swords that were 10,000 feet long descended and sealed off the area within a 1,000-mile radius. A super sword formation was formed instantly. 20,000 huge divine swords shuttled back and forth and released a shapeless sword intention that suppressed the universe and a violent sword aura that could destroy everything. The gigantic swords that filled the sky shuttled back and forth, either blocking the gigantic waves, raging tides, and saber lights and sword shadows that blotted out the sun, or killing the battle formations of the surging Water Palace disciples. Bang! Bang, 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 and kacha, kacha. Loud noises kept ringing out, and the heaven and earth within a radius of several hundred kilometers was completely thrown into chaos. No matter how turbulent the waves were, they were all blocked by the net of sword light. No matter how sharp and cold the heavenly eye sword was, it was cut into pieces by the star sword. Tens of thousands of saber lights and sword shadows were unable to penetrate the barrier of the sword net, and they all collapsed and dissipated. After a few breaths of time, the first round of battle between the two sides ended. The result was beyond everyone's expectations. The elders and disciples of Surging Wave Palace were even more shocked as they revealed expressions of extreme shock. Ji Tianqing had single-handedly blocked the Surging Wave Palace's attack with just a super sword formation. The combined attack of 7 elders and over 1,000 disciples was actually neutralized by him alone. What kind of astonishing strength was this? What kind of terrifying methods were these? Everyone understood that even the Surging Wave Palace Lord did not possess such strength. Even the usually expressionless Surging Wave Palace Lord could not help but frown and narrow her eyes. A deep sense of shock and astonishment flashed through her eyes as she thought to herself. This lad first fought a huge battle with Heavenly Sect and killed Long Fun and the experts of Heavenly Sect. Tonight, he fought a huge battle with Sacred Fire Sect and killed Sheng Wuyin and the disciples of Sacred Fire Sect. Logically speaking, no matter how strong he is, he should be severely injured and weak. But why is it that he doesn't show any signs of weakness or injury? Could it be that he hid too deeply and escaped my detection? Or is he truly not injured and his strength has always been at his peak? The Surging Wave Palace Lord fell into silence as she hesitated and weighed her options. If it was the former, she was confident enough to rip apart Ji Tianqing's disguise and reveal his true form, causing him to die tragically on the spot. If it was the latter, she had severely misjudged Ji Tianqing's strength and condition. The consequences would be unimaginable. There was a high chance that Surging Wave Palace would follow in the footsteps of Sacred Fire Sect. The Surging Wave Palace Lord was extremely calm and cautious. She considered defeat before victory. After a short moment of consideration, she decided to continue attacking and test Ji Tianqing's strength. Kill. Her gaze regained its coldness and determination as she glared at Ji Tianqing in the night sky and hollered coldly. The 7 elders and more than 1,000 disciples tossed aside the shock and distracting thoughts in their hearts and attacked with all their might. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. All sorts of divine powers and ultimate skills were used once more. Saber lights and sword shadows that blotted out the skies surged towards Ji Tianqing and the others like a flood. This time round, everyone released in even stronger combat strength with a stubborn and unyielding mentality. The divine powers that blotted out the skies were even more dazzling and powerful. However, the outcome was not different. Ji Tianqing had already perfected the heaven-vanquishing sword formation and injected 98 types of nomological powers into it. The 20,000 stellar swords turned into 5-colored divine swords with an even more mysterious and sharp aura. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The 10,000 gigantic swords danced and defended against the tsunami, slicing through the saber lights and sword shadows and shattering all sorts of divine powers and ultimate skills. The attacks of the Surging Wave Palace disciples were blocked and neutralized by the heaven-vanquishing sword formation once more. Seizing the opportunity, Lin Shui, Zhan Hong, White Dragon, and the others released their trump cards and ultimate skills as well, charging towards the Surging Wave Palace disciples. Purge the world in blood. Lin Shui turned into a blood-colored phantom and charged in front of dozens of Surging Wave Palace disciples, slashing down with her blood saber with both hands. The blood saber shone with a resplendent light and brought forth a blood-colored saber shadow that blotted out the skies, drowning the Surging Wave Palace disciples. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. After a series of flashes of blood, the night sky turned empty. More than 70 Surging Wave Palace disciples, including the low-level divine Lord Deacon who led the team, were sliced into pieces by the blood saber and scattered into the night sky. Many godhoods flew out and fled in panic. Lin Shui's white hair fluttered as her blood saber danced and slashed out hundreds of dazzling beams of bloodlight. Crack! Crack! Shattering sounds rang out one after another as those godhoods were sliced into pieces. On the other side, Zhan Hong entered a berserk state and turned into a 10,000-foot-tall dragon blood goddess. Like a cannonball, he charged towards a group of surging Wave Palace disciples. White Dragon was afraid that something would happen to her, so he also turned into a 10,000-foot-long lightning White Dragon to assist her in her charge. He released lightning that blotted out the skies and swept up a shocking hurricane. The two of them joined forces and quickly killed the surging Wave Palace disciples. Similar scenes were playing out at the same time. Blood Illusion God, Gold Left Emissary, Blood Dragon Right Emissary, and the others also joined forces to kill a group of surging Wave Palace disciples. Ji Tianxing, Qian Yu, and Black Dragon also instantly killed more than 70 disciples in a berserk and invincible manner. 2 breaths later, the second round of confrontation ended. Ji Tianxing and the others were unscathed while the surging Wave Palace paid the price in blood. A total of 4 battle formations and 300 surging Wave Palace disciples were instantly killed by Ji Tianxing and the others. A gap instantly appeared in the surging Wave Palace's encirclement. Everyone's spirit and will also suffered a setback and blow. The fastest mobile version of the website. Chapter 31:16. Surging Wave Palace's morale was affected after receiving such a blow. The fighting spirit of the 7 elders and disciples dropped noticeably. Their full-powered attacks were blocked and neutralized by the heaven-vanquishing sword formation. As for the attacks of Ji Tianxing and the others, the disciples of Surging Wave Palace were unable to defend against them and were killed with ease. Wasn't that the omen of defeat? At the thought of that, the disciples of Surging Wave Palace were filled with worry and anxiety. Helpless, they turned to the 7 elders and the Lord of Surging Wave Palace, hoping that they could come up with an effective countermeasure. The 7 elders felt uneasy as well. They were both furious and worried as they looked at the Lord of Surging Wave Palace. The Lord of Surging Wave Palace was still calm and composed as she sat on the ice lotus platform. She ordered expressionlessly, "Disciples of Surging Wave Palace, form the Surging Wave 9 Revolutions divine formation and fight the enemy together." At the same time as she gave that order, she flew high into the skies. Swoosh! The ice blue lotus platform hovered high in the skies and released 18 ice blue light pillars that flew in all directions like divine dragons. The Lord of Surging Wave Palace sat on the lotus platform and conjured a divine art with both hands that moved at lightning speed, forming a mysterious divine seal. It was clear that she had taken action personally. With herself as the core, she gathered the strength of more than 1,000 Surging Wave Palace disciples to form the Surging Wave 9 Revolutions divine formation to defend against the attacks of the heaven-vanquishing sword formation and Ji Tianxing. The Surging Wave 9 Revolutions divine formation was the sect protection formation of Surging Wave Palace, and it was also an ancestral monarch grade god formation. The offensive and destructive power of that formation was only at the superior grade monarch grade. However, its defensive power was at the level of a superior grade monarch grade. Through 2 clashes, the Lord of Surging Wave Palace had already found out the answer. She had to admit that Ji Tianxing was not faking it or putting on a strong front. He was truly uninjured, and his strength was at his peak state such that no one could see through him clearly. If the disciples of Surging Wave Palace continued to attack, they would definitely be at a disadvantage. With each clash, hundreds of disciples would die in battle. Before long, Surging Wave Palace would be defeated. Therefore, the Lord of Surging Wave Palace made a prompt decision to change her strategy. She no longer allowed the disciples to attack proactively and formed a defensive formation instead. As long as she used the Surging Wave's 9-turn divine formation to block the attacks of the heaven-destroying sword formation and Ji Tianxing and the others, she would be able to stall for time. She had already sent out a communication jade slip to report the situation to Grand Prince Lien. Prince Lien had already set up many forces outside the god-burying mountain range, forming an inescapable net. As long as she could stall Ji Tianxing, the experts from the other forces would quickly arrive. At that time, they would gather the strength of many forces and experts to jointly encircle Ji Tianxing. No matter how capable Ji Tianxing was, he would still be buried here. Swish! Swish! Very quickly, the 7 elders and over 1,000 surging water palace disciples changed positions. The surging wave palace disciples formed 17 square formations while the 7 elders formed 1 square formation. There were a total of 18 square formations, and they were just enough to support the 18 icy blue light pillars released by the Lotus Throne. Suddenly, the foundation of the 9 rotations of blue waves was formed. With the Lord of Surging Waves at the center, he sat on a lotus platform high in the sky. 18 light pillars extended from the Lotus Throne, connecting the 18 square formations and gathering the strength of over 1,000 disciples and 7 elders. The night sky was immediately covered by a layer of icy blue divine light that covered a radius of 250 kilometers. Swish! 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 The icy blue divine light continued to condense and thicken, and its defensive power also increased explosively. In just 2 breaths, a barrier of icy blue divine light that covered a radius of 250 kilometers was successfully formed. The heaven-destroying sword formation sped up, and the 10,000 giant swords stabbed even more violently, but they were all blocked by the icy blue light barrier. The giant divine sword stabbed into the icy blue light barrier, producing crisp clanging sounds as countless fragments of divine light burst forth. However, the icy blue light barrier was unbreakable. Even though it was constantly trembling from the giant divine swords, it did not break. Instead, the giant swords were sent flying. After 3 breaths of time, the giant divine swords still could not break through the icy blue light barrier. When the surging wave palace disciples saw this, they were instantly relieved and regained their confidence and calmness. Some of the elders even sneered mockingly as they mocked Ji Tianxing. "Lad, what other tricks do you have? Use them all." This surging wave's 9 revolutions divine formation is the ultimate technique of surging waves palace. Its defense is unparalleled in the world. Everyone in Surging Waves Palace is of one mind. This divine formation gathers all of our strength. With just you alone, no matter how capable you are, you won't be able to do anything to us. Ha ha! Little B asterisk starred. Weren't you very arrogant earlier on? We're right here. Come and kill us if you can. The Surging Waves 9 Revolutions divine formation was their greatest reliance. Under the protection of the icy blue light barrier, everyone was safe and at ease. When they heard what the elders said, many deacons and Surging Waves Palace disciples mocked and scolded Ji Tianxing and the others. Ji Tianxing was expressionless and turned a deaf ear to everyone's words. His eyes turned golden as he stared at the Surging Waves 9 Revolutions divine formation expressionlessly, looking for a flaw and a way to break it. On the other hand, Lin Shui, Bai Long, Zhen Hong, and the others were furious and filled with killing intent. When they saw the despicable faces of the Surging Waves Palace elders, they all waved their weapons and executed their ultimate killing moves to attack the icy blue light barrier with all their might. However, the sky was filled with blood light, saber light, and divine ability shadows. They all bombarded the icy blue light barrier, but were completely ineffective. The icy blue light barrier was indestructible and did not leave any marks or cracks after taking a few attacks from everyone. This scene made the elders and disciples of Surging Waves Palace even more confident and arrogant. They laughed loudly and mocked and scolded Lin Shui and the others without restraint. "Ha ha! You bunch of stupid pigs are truly comical and laughable. I've already said that the Surging Waves 9 Revolutions divine formation's defense is unparalleled in the world. You guys are like ants trying to shake a tree. Even Tianxing can't do anything to us. What more, you scum? Don't overestimate yourself. Bastards, stop resisting stubbornly. Kneel down and surrender obediently, kowtow and beg for mercy. Kill all the men and grind their bones to dust. Leave all the women and let everyone." The elders of Surging Waves Palace cared about their statuses. Although they spoke rudely, they would not be too despicable. However, The deacons and disciples were unbearably vulgar and used all sorts of profanities. Even the Lord of surging waves, who sat on the lotus platform high in the sky, could not help but frown with a displeased expression. However, she was the leader of Surging Waves Palace after all. At this juncture, even if the disciples were unrestrained, she could not stop them. She could only focus and control the god formation with all her might to defend against the suppression and strangulation of the heaven-vanquishing sword formation. Both parties were in a stalemate just like that. A full 100 breaths had passed. Lin Shui, the white dragon, and the others could not do anything to the disciples of Surging Waves Palace. Ji Tianxing remained silent the entire time and stared at the icy blue light barrier with his golden eyes, searching for a flaw in the god formation amidst the billions of divine power meridians. Finally, he raised his brow and opened his eyes slightly, his lips curling into a sinister sneer. "I see." The next moment, he gripped the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and attacked brazenly. Chapter 31:17. The elders and disciples of Surging Wave Palace were still immersed in their confidence. They maintained the Surging Wave 9 rotations array, while mocking and insulting Ji Tianxing and the others. Under the ice-sky barrier, they felt that they were safe and invincible. That was why they were so fearless. However, no one expected that Ji Tianxing would attack when they were at their most arrogant. His attack this time was not an ordinary test. It was a killing blow. Ji Tianxing's figure flashed, and he teleported into the night sky. He appeared in the southeast of the Lotus platform, 100 miles away from the Lord of Surging Wave Palace, and 1,000 feet below the Lotus platform. This was the place. Beneath his feet was the indestructible ice-sky barrier. The ice-blue light wall that looked very thick and flashing with cold light actually hid an extremely tiny flaw. There was nothing absolutely perfect in this world. Be it divine weapons, array formations, or elixirs, they were all the same. Even though the Surging Wave 9 rotations array was a supreme-grade monarch array formed by 120 million meridians. However, there were still 2 or 3 flaws and errors among the 120 million veins of the formation. These flaws and mistakes were the flaws of the entire array. Of course, even the expert who created this array might not know the existence of the flaws and mistakes, let alone pinpoint the exact location. However, Ji Tianxing did it. Moreover, he found a flaw and found it in just 100 breaths' time. Such ability and methods were comparable to a supreme divine king. Sword breaking 9 heavens. After confirming the location of the flaw, Ji Tianxing held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and stabbed it with all his might. The sword of burial of heaven released an endless amount of blazing white divine light and stabbed the ice-sky barrier in the most violent and invincible manner. Boom! Crack! A thunderous sound exploded in the night sky. The seemingly indestructible ice-sky barrier was actually pierced through by the blazing white sword light that was thousands of feet long. A hole the size of a house appeared on the ice-sky barrier. Immediately after, sword energy and divine power that could destroy everything were injected into the ice-sky barrier. Crack! Crack! With a crisp cracking sound, dense cracks appeared around the hole, extending in all directions. Hundreds of cracks spread across the ice-blue barrier like a spider web. From the gaps and loopholes, billions of icy blue fragments burst out and scattered in the night sky. It was like a rainstorm of ice crystals. The Surging Waves 9 Revolution's divine formation that the Surging Waves Palace was most proud of was destroyed by Ji Tianxing just like that. At this moment, the ice-blue barrier within a radius of 500 miles began to tremble violently. More than 1,000 Surging Waves Palace disciples and 7 elders were all dumbstruck, as though they had been petrified. All the mocking and insulting voices came to an abrupt end, stuck in the throats of the crowd, unable to make the slightest sound. Everyone's body and expression stiffened. His eyes were wide open, revealing a look of extreme shock and fear. The person who was the most shocked and appalled was none other than the Lord of Surging Wave Palace. Originally, She was sitting on the lotus throne, her expression cold and her emotions unperturbed. At this moment, she widened her eyes in shock and stood up abruptly. She no longer had the bearing and demeanor of a palace lord or an expert. How is this possible? She glared at Ji Tianxing and the hole in the ice blue barrier and exclaimed. An incomparable shock filled her heart and soul, causing her to tremble from head to toe. As the saying went, the layman watched the show while the expert watched the artistry. All the Surging Waves Palace disciples saw was Ji Tianxing's domineering and unparalleled strength as he pierced through the ice blue barrier with a single sword strike. However, the Lord of Surging Wave Palace saw it clearly. Ji Tianxing's sword strike was definitely not a random attack. He had seen through the Surging Wave's 9 revolutions divine formation and found the flaw of the god formation, destroying it with a single sword strike. The god formation that our sect is most proud of has a flaw and a flaw. Why is he able to find the flaw of the god formation in a short 100 breaths when I don't know about it? This is ridiculous. After understanding the mystery, the Lord of Surging Wave Palace felt the world spin and she saw stars. In fact, she even felt a little dazed and unreal. After all, everything was way too ridiculous. An outsider, an enemy, knew the Surging Wave's 9 revolutions divine formation better than her? What a joke. Fu. The Lord of Surging Wave Palace sneered dejectedly. Suddenly, her throat heated up and she spat out a mouthful of blood. She was cold on the outside but proud on the inside. Yet, she could not take such a blow and spat out blood. Of course, the main reason why she spat out blood was because Ji Tianxing had broken through the Surging Wave's 9 revolutions divine formation. As the core of the god formation, she was definitely implicated and suffered a backlash. Her organs were already severely injured. Crack! Crack! While everyone was still in a daze, Ji Tianxing swung the Burial of Heaven again and slashed dozens of times at the ice blue barrier. Every single strike was at a tricky spot, landing on the gaps and cracks. The outcome was obvious. With a crisp cracking sound, the ice blue barrier was split into pieces and collapsed on the spot. Splash! Thousands of ice blue fragments fell from the night sky with a loud rumble. Every single shard had a different shape and size. The large ones were the size of mountains, while the small ones were the size of houses. All of them crashed onto the ground. In less than 2 breaths, the ice blue barrier within a radius of 250 kilometers was reduced to smithereens and was completely destroyed. It was only at this moment that everyone from Surging Wave Palace snapped out of their daze and burst into deafening cries and curses. Of course, there were also sorrowful wails and painful screams. The battlefield was in chaos. The Surging Wave Palace disciples' fighting spirit plummeted, and their spirits and wills crumbled one after another. Seizing the opportunity, Lin Shui, White Dragon, and the others cheered excitedly and charged into the crowd with menacing smiles. All sorts of mystic skills and saber lights and sword shadows rained down like torrential floodwaters. The heaven-vanquishing sword formation sped up as well, releasing a dense rain of gigantic divine swords to kill the Surging Wave Palace disciples. Instantly, the night sky was filled with blood-curdling screams and muffled sounds. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere as severed limbs and blood rained down from the night sky. Without their protection, the Surging Wave Palace disciples were like weak lambs that were slaughtered wantonly. The more arrogant and smug they were previously, the more wretched and tragic they were now. Defeated. To think that I would have been defeated. Utterly defeated. Fu. To think that the Surging Wave Palace that has a legacy of 10,000 years would be defeated in the hands of a foreign race lad. I've underestimated him, after all. The Lord of Surging Waves stood on the lotus platform with a dispirited expression and murmured dejectedly. Her face was filled with a bitter smile, and her expression was sorrowful and desolate. At this point, the defeat of Surging Wave Palace was already a foregone conclusion. However, she calmed down quickly and pulled herself together, returning to her cold self. Although Surging Wave Palace was about to be defeated, she refused to give up. Even if the heaven-vanquishing sword formation sealed this place, she wanted to do her best to lead her disciples out of the encirclement. How many of them could escape, and how many of them could survive would all depend on the will of the heavens. The fastest mobile version of the website. Chapter 31:18. Calm down, disciples of Surging Wave Palace. Brace yourselves. The Lord of Surging Wave endured her injuries and stood upright on the lotus platform, shouting with all her might. Her voice was powerful, cold, and dignified, containing a power that could shock one's spirit. Initially, the disciples of Surging Wave's palace panicked and were killed to the point that they threw away their armor and were utterly defeated. However, many of them calmed down when they heard the Lord of Surging Wave shout. With 7 elders leading the way, 18 wardens and 800-odd disciples tried their best to gather around the Lord of Surging Wave. Everyone knew that they could no longer be separated now that the Surging Wave 9 Revolutions formation was destroyed. They had to gather around the Lord of Surging Wave to have a chance to counterattack or escape. If it was any other day, they would only need 2 to 3 breaths to gather. However, the process was extremely difficult and took a long time now. As they gathered around the Lord of Surging Wave, they were constantly attacked by Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui, and the others. Every few feet they advanced, someone would die. 100 breaths later, everyone finally gathered around the Lord of Surging Wave. At this time, there were only 7 elders, 12 deacons, and more than 400 disciples who had survived. Apart from them, all the other disciples of Surging Wave Palace had died in battle. More than half of them were killed by Ji Tianxing and the others, while the rest were killed by the heaven-vanquishing sword formation. It was fortunate that the Lord of Surging Wave had stepped in and defended against the attacks of Ji Tianxing and the others with all his might, neutralizing the attacks of the heaven-vanquishing sword formation and saving the lives of the 400-odd disciples. If not for her desperate rescue, the 400-odd disciples might not have been able to gather. Heavenly Ice Spike Formation. Break through with all your might. After everyone gathered, the Lord of Surging Wave gave the order immediately. More than 400 elders, deacons, and disciples immediately arranged themselves into a formation that resembled a sharp cone made of ice crystals. This was the assault formation that Surging Wave Palace often used. It could effectively gather everyone's strength and break through the defense line and encirclement quickly. The Lord of Surging Wave stood in the middle of the formation, overseeing the entire situation. The 7 elders were at the tip of the formation, turning into the sharpest blades that cut through all obstacles. The 12 wardens were at the back of the formation, covering the back of the 400-odd disciples. At this moment, the disciples of Surging Wave's Palace displayed a strong sense of unity. It could be said that they were united and their morale was high. Swish! Swish! Thousands of giant divine swords rained down like a torrential downpour. The 7 elders rushed forward and blocked the attack without any regard for their own safety. Lord Surging Wave also executed his ultimate divine powers with all his might, repelling the gigantic swords. More than 400 disciples also worked together to resist the sword formation's attack. However, everyone managed to block the attack of the heaven-destroying sword formation, but they could not block the encirclement of Ji Tianxing, Lin Shui, and the others. Starry River Break, Demon Blood Sealing Devil Saber, Stars of Destruction, Soaring Tyrant Dragon Slash. Along with the furious roars, the 5-colored light blade and fist radiance that could split the sky and the earth smashed into the crowd with the power to destroy everything. Pung pung pung. Rumble. Deafening muffled sounds rang out continuously in the night sky, shaking the heavens and the earth. The Surging Wave Palace's all-formation was instantly shrouded in chaotic divine light, turning into a mess. Several gaps were created in the formation, and dozens of disciples and 3 deacons were killed on the spot. Blood rained down, flesh and blood splattered everywhere, and screams of agony and shock sounded one after another. Such a scene made Lord Surging Wave and the elders so furious that their eyes were about to pop out of their sockets, and their bodies were burning with bloody flames. If they could, they really wanted to fight to the death and perish together with Ji Tianqing. However, the big picture was more important, and they could only suppress this thought and risk their lives to protect the disciples. The bitter battle was still going on, but time passed extremely slowly. The surging wave palace disciples flew south with difficulty, getting closer and closer to the edge of the heaven-destroying sword formation. 100 miles, 90 miles, 80 miles, 70 miles. However, as they struggled to advance, their numbers decreased at an extremely fast rate. More than 430 people, more than 440 people, more than 380 people, more than 330 people. 15 minutes later, the surging wave palace disciples were only about 40 miles away from the edge of the sword formation. At this moment, the all formation had already collapsed and could no longer be formed. 80% of the initial 400-odd disciples were killed as well. The remaining 80-odd were also covered in blood and severely injured. All of them were in a wretched state. It was difficult for them to advance any further, and they gradually slowed down until they came to a stop. The Lord's surging wave, who was covered in blood and had disheveled hair, turned back to look. The ruins spanning dozens of miles were filled with the corpses of the surging wave palace disciples, and dark red and purple bloodstains could be seen everywhere. Looking at the remnants of the defeated army beside him, it was even more tragic and tragic. A deep sense of sorrow surged into his heart as tears of blood gushed from his eyes, and he lamented internally, "The heavens are going to destroy surging wave palace." At that moment, she could already see the outcome of surging wave palace's failure to break out. It was as Ji Tianqing had said before the battle. Surging wave palace would be destroyed on the spot, following in the footsteps of Sacred Fire sect. Since struggling was futile, she might as well give up on breaking out and fight to the death without a care. Although the outcome would not change, she would still have to die here. At the very least, she could release the torrential rage and killing intent in her heart. Kill. Kill that bastard Tianqing at all costs. The Lord's surging wave stood on the lotus platform, roaring at the top of his lungs with a face covered in blood and tears. The 5 elders, 8 attendants, and 70-odd elite disciples that were lucky enough to survive had long lost their wills and were in complete despair. They knew that there was no hope of breaking out of the encirclement. If they could retaliate and drag Ji Tianqing down with them, their deaths would be worth it. Upon hearing the Lord's surging wave's orders, they charged towards Ji Tianqing without any regard for their own safety and launched their most ferocious attacks. At that moment, they were like frenzied, bloodthirsty, ferocious beasts. They did not care about their own injuries or the deaths of their companions, and only had Ji Tianqing in their eyes. They had lost the ability to think and were left with only a single thought. That was to perish together with Ji Tianqing. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Hundreds of divine powers and secret skills gave off dazzling divine light, exploding with destructive power and raining down on Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing made a prompt decision and used his ultimate skill, infinite turbidity, with all his might. Swoosh! With a flash of white light, his body turned transparent and blended into the universe. The universe within a radius of tens of thousands of miles became his protective shield, helping him to withstand all the attacks. The saber radiance, sword shadows, and divine light that blotted out the sky passed through him without any delay, scattering in the universe and disappearing very quickly. Ji Tianqing was unharmed, and the people from Surging Wave Palace were destined to be futile. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Lin Shui, Sir God Blood Illusion, and the rest attacked the disciples of Surging Wave Palace with all their might. The heaven-destroying sword formation also unleashed its full power, sweeping up dozens of sword hurricanes that wreaked havoc on the battlefield. Rumble. Chapter 31:19. Even though the Surging Wave Palace disciples suffered heavy casualties, the remaining 40-odd people turned a blind eye to it. They continued to attack Ji Tianqing in a frenzy. Their bodies burned with blood flames as they went completely berserk. Ji Tianxing continued to sit in the night sky. His body turned transparent and blurry, appearing and disappearing. No matter how they attacked, they could not hurt him at all. All the divine powers scattered on the ground, absorbed and dispelled by heaven and earth. Seizing the opportunity, he controlled the heaven-vanquishing sword formation to kill the surging Wave Palace disciples. Lin Shui, Zhan Hong, and the others attacked with all their might as well, killing the surging Wave Palace disciples one after another. Finally, 100 breaths passed. The surging Wave Palace disciples were all killed, leaving only the surging Wave Palace Master, 4 elders, and 3 deacons alive. The battle came to an abrupt end as the surging Wave Palace Master and the others woke up. The 4 elders and 3 deacons stood close to the lotus platform. Everyone was bathed in blood, and their clothes were tattered. Some of them even had broken limbs. Even so, they did not cry out in pain or wail. They merely glared at Ji Tianxing with venomous gazes as they panted heavily. Silence returned to the night sky. Ji Tianxing's figure became clearer and more corporeal as well. He strode towards the surging Wave Palace Master, wielding the sword of burial of heaven, and said indifferently, "Everything is over. Accept your fate. Don't ever admit defeat or surrender. I don't need captives." The surging Wave Palace Master stood on the lotus platform, holding a snake-shaped ice crystal sword in his right hand as he glared at Ji Tianxing with bloodshot eyes. "Are you really going to kill them all without leaving any chance of survival?" She grit her teeth and asked with a hoarse voice. Ji Tianxing's expression was indifferent, and he did not reply. The surging Wave Palace Master understood what he meant. However, he was still somewhat indignant as he asked once more, "I'll let you do whatever you want with me. Let them go. Now that surging Wave Palace is in such a state, it's no different from disbanding. They won't be a threat to you anymore." Ji Tianxing shook his head and said nothing more. In fact, everyone present understood this point. So what if Ji Tianxing only killed the Lord of Surging Waves and spared the 4 elders and the 3 deacons? Would the 7 divine monarchs be deeply grateful and give up on dealing with him? No, they would only be angrier, and their hatred for Ji Tianxing would be even more unforgettable. They would even use all means to take revenge on Ji Tianxing. Therefore, how could there be any mercy between life and death enemies? Aha! So we really brought this upon ourselves? The Lord of Surging Waves was filled with despair as he smirked coldly. Murderous intent surged from her body as she madly gathered God power in her body and roared hysterically. "Since there's no way out and you're going to die either way, then I'll teach you a lesson you'll never forget." As she spoke, she brazenly self-destructed. His shriveled body trembled violently, igniting a bloody flame that soared into the sky. The godhood in his mind was madly devouring all of the god power, preparing for the most violent explosion. A destructive aura spread out with her as the center. The 4 elders and the 3 deacons were not surprised by the outcome at all. They even made a prompt decision to self-destruct. In an instant, 8 balls of bloody flame soared into the sky, exuding a destructive aura of death. Seeing the scene, Ji Tianxing frowned and a cold light flashed past his eyes. Lin Shui, Sir God Blood Illusion, and the rest were also shocked. Their expressions turned grave and their hearts were in their throats. Everyone knew that 8 divine monarchs self-destructing together was enough to destroy an area with a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles. Perhaps Ji Tianxing was strong enough to withstand the power of the self-destructing and only be seriously injured. Lin Shui and Sir God Blood Illusion were not weak either. They should be able to survive, but they would be more seriously injured. However, Zhan Hong left Emissary Jean by Long, and the rest would not be able to withstand it. They would definitely die on the spot. These people were Ji Tianxing's friends and companions. They were very important to him. Therefore, the Lord of Surging Waves said to teach him a lesson he would never forget. Once they succeeded in self-destructing, the lesson would definitely be tragic. At the moment of life and death, Lin Shui, Sir Godblood Illusion, left Emissary Jean, and the rest were so anxious that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Mr. Tianxing, think of a way. We are doomed. Even if we teleport and escape now, we will not be able to escape from the range of their self-destructing. Mister, you are very powerful. You will definitely be able to stop them from self-destructing, right? Looking at the situation, it was too late to escape. They could only think of a way to stop the people from Surging Waves Palace from self-destructing. However, the 8 divine monarchs were prepared to die and self-destructed at the same time. No matter how strong Ji Tianxing was, he could only stop 3 people from self-destructing. He could not do more than that. No matter how one looked at it, they would definitely die. You must be in despair, right? If you don't let us live, don't think about living either. Let's embrace death together. Even if I die, I won't let you off. It's too late to regret now. Cry. Beg for mercy. In the bloody flames that filled the sky, the master of Surging Waves Palace, the elders, and the deacons were all laughing crazily. They were about to be annihilated, but they felt a sense of relief and vented their anger without restraint. Seeing this, Lin Shui, Zhan Hong, and the others were worried, but there was nothing they could do. Only Ji Tianxing and Bai Long were still calm. Ji Tianxing looked at the master of Surging Waves Palace and the others in the bloody flames and said calmly, "Allowing you to self-destruct is my mercy to you. However, if you want to drag us down with you, you are thinking too much." As he spoke, he raised his right hand and took out a black divine pagoda. Swoosh! The black and mysterious divine pagoda instantly grew to a height of 10,000 feet and stood in the night sky. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a ray of white light that swept by Long, Zhan Hong, Lin Shui, left Emissary Jean, and the others. Of course, Qian Yu and the Black Dragon were also included. With a flash of white light, everyone disappeared. The next moment, Ji Tianxing led everyone into the divine pagoda and appeared on the 3rd level. Endless darkness surrounded them, and a vast wasteland underfoot. This space was silent and empty. Lin Shui, Zhan Hong, and the others immediately understood Ji Tianxing's intention and heaved a sigh of relief. They knew that with the protection of the divine pagoda, everyone should be safe. At the same time, the master of Surging Waves Palace, the elders, and the deacons had accumulated their strength to the limit and were about to explode. They were laughing cruelly and bloodthirstily, waiting to see Ji Tianxing and the others struggle and cry in despair. However, with a flash of white light, Ji Tianxing and the others disappeared. There was only one divine pagoda left in the night sky. It was mysterious and powerful, with a majestic aura. Seeing this, the master of Surging Waves Palace and the others were dumbfounded. Their eyes were filled with extreme grief and resentment. No! The master of Surging Waves Palace let out a shrill cry. She knew that the plan had failed again. Their self-destruct couldn't hurt Ji Tianxing and the others at all. It was destined to be a futile effort. But now, it was too late for regrets. They couldn't stop the self-destruct. Boom! The next moment, 8 divine emperors exploded at the same time, releasing the most dazzling light in the night sky. The fastest mobile version of the website. Chapter 3120. Rumble. An earth-shattering explosion shook the heavens. 8 balls of colorful divine light rose into the sky like mushroom clouds. The entire heaven-destroying sword formation was filled with dazzling divine lights. There was no blind spot. A divine power storm that could destroy the heavens and earth spread out in all directions, exploding with a loud bang. The first to be affected was the Ju Qian 10 Absolute's Tower. This tower was thousands of feet tall and was covered in black light. It was engulfed by the destructive divine power, tumbling and flying towards the north. Immediately after, the heaven-destroying sword formation within a radius of 1,000 miles was also blown apart and collapsed on the spot. The 20,000 giant swords were shattered into pieces, turning into endless fragments that surged in all directions like a torrent. The colorful divine power flood spread in all directions at the speed of light. 10,000 miles, 30,000 miles, 50,000 miles, 80,000 miles, wherever the torrent of divine power passed, it swept away and destroyed everything in its path. Mountains and rivers were flattened, and the earth was dug tens of thousands of feet deep. All the flowers, trees, rocks, birds, and beasts were turned into dust in an instant. Originally, the divine power flood from the self-destruction could spread to an area of 140,000 miles. However, the heaven-destroying sword formation offset part of the power. As a result, the divine power flood spread to a radius of 100,000 miles and gradually dissipated. The world was illuminated with colorful colors, and it was as bright as day. The horrifying loud noise didn't disappear for a long time. The dazzling divine light lasted for 15 minutes before it was extinguished. The earth trembled violently, and the dust that covered the sky didn't dissipate. With the explosion as the center, 50,000 miles to the north was flat like a desert covered with golden sand. It was the same 50,000 miles to the south. It was a barren and dead silence. Of course, 50,000 miles to the south was beyond the God-burying mountain range and bordered the territory of the Raging Flames' divine kingdom. There was a grassland there, but it had also become a sunken desert. Ripples were left on the ground, and the depth and impact of the explosion were decreasing. The power of the self-destruction of 8 divine lords was actually so powerful. Even if a dozen meteors fell here, they wouldn't be able to create such a terrifying destructive power. This was the real destruction of heaven and earth. With such an earth-shattering momentum, one could see the light and feel the abnormality from a million miles away. After an unknown amount of time, perhaps it was 15 minutes, or perhaps it was 2 hours, peace was restored between heaven and earth. The loud noise and the dazzling divine light dissipated. Only the smoke and dust that covered the sky still filled the world, and the wind couldn't blow it away. The long night finally passed. A new day had arrived, and the sun rose from the east. The hazy morning sun shone down, but it couldn't penetrate the smoke and dust. The world was still dark. 5,000 miles away from the explosion, in a pit filled with dust, the divine pagoda, lying in the sand, lit up with a mysterious black light. Whoosh! It shook off the sand and stones that covered its body and flew back into the sky, floating quietly. Then a white light flashed in the sky, and several figures appeared one after another. Blood, the 6 people, and Jean were all safe and sound. Even though the previous battle had drained a great deal of their divine power, and they had also sustained injuries of varying degrees, it was still not enough. Now they were clean and refreshed. They were no longer in a sorry state with disheveled hair and bloodstains. Of course, blood. Jean Hong were seriously injured. They couldn't recover in a short period of time. Bai Long, Qin Yu, and Hei Long didn't appear. They were also seriously injured, so they went into the distorted space-time to heal. They had gained a lot from the previous night's battle. They understood a lot. They only needed to cultivate in seclusion for a period of time, and their power would increase rapidly. When Lin Shui, Jean Hong, and the others saw the vast desert filled with dust, they were all shocked and let out cries of surprise. Oh my God, is this the power of a divine lord's self-explosion? Within the range of my divine sense, everything within a radius of 20,000 miles has become a desert. Not even a blade of grass can grow. This is too terrifying. It's really destructive. It's really terrifying. Luckily, Master has the divine tower. It blocked the power of the self-explosion at the critical moment. Otherwise, we would all be dead. Everyone looked around and clicked their tongues in wonder as they discussed in shock. Ji Tianqing was calm. He wasn't excited at all. He was even a little disappointed. He looked at the desert under his feet and sighed regretfully. Sigh, life is really not what you want. I worked for half the night for nothing. I can't even get a space ring, let alone a divine spark fragment. Indeed, he had wasted 4 hours and spent so much effort to kill more than 1,000 people from the Palace of Surging Waves. Divine weapons, space rings, and godhead fragments could be seen everywhere on the 1,000-mile-wide battlefield. If he could clean up the battlefield, he would be able to obtain tens of billions of cultivation resources and divine weapons. Most importantly, he could take the divine spark fragments of the Palace of Surging Waves and the Seven Elders. He could gain more than 10 precepts. But it was a pity. The self-explosion of the Palace of Surging Waves and the others destroyed everything within a radius of 100,000 miles. The bones, space rings, and divine spark fragments scattered on the battlefield were also destroyed and turned into dust. Everything within 100,000 miles was clean. What spoils of war were there? After a while, when Lin Shui and the others finished discussing and calmed down, Ji Tianxing waved his hand dispiritedly and said, "There's nothing to see. We should go." Lin Shui, Zhan Hong, and the others were stunned. They looked at him doubtfully. "Kid, we destroyed the Palace of Surging Waves and caused such a big commotion. It will definitely shock the Raging Flames divine country. We created a miracle. Why aren't you happy at all?" Lin Shui put her hands on her hips and looked at Ji Tianxing with a questioning look. Left Emissary Jean also asked doubtfully, "Young master, we fought 2 battles in one night. First, we destroyed the Sacred Fire sect, and then the Palace of Surging Waves. The 2 sects were completely wiped out, and we didn't lose a single one. This is an unprecedented victory. You haven't even entered the Raging Flames divine country, and your fame is spread everywhere. How domineering and awe-inspiring is this? You should be happy about such a joyous event." Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said unhappily, "What's the use of that fame? Apart from making the Raging Flames divine country unite to encircle and annihilate us, it will only attract criticism and hatred. We worked in vain for half a night and didn't even get a single divine stone. If it were you, would you be happy?" Left Emissary Jean suddenly choked, not knowing what to say. The blood dragon, right emissary's expression was a bit strange. He muttered in a low voice, "Why, young master's focus is different from ours?" The blood illusion god monarch nodded in agreement and said, "Maybe we are too inexperienced and have a shallow vision. We are also making a fuss over nothing. To young master, this kind of thing has long been common. There's nothing to be excited about. Well, when we get used to it, we should be a lot calmer." Chapter 31:21. The black divine ship, which was thousands of feet long, passed through the smoke and dust in the sky and flew south at lightning speed. Soon, the divine ship crossed tens of thousands of miles of desert and left the god-burying mountain range. After entering a vast grassland, they officially entered the territory of the Raging Flame divine country. Lin Shui, blood illusion god, and Zhen Hong all entered a secret room to heal their injuries. Left Emissary Jean and Blood Dragon, right emissary, steered the divine ship and took turns to rest and heal their injuries. Before setting off, they had asked Ji Tianxing, where should they go next? Although they were entering the Raging Flame divine country, did they have a specific destination? Ji Tianxing said calmly, "Just keep flying south." The specific destination was not the Raging Flame divine country, but the imperial city of the Great Yin Empire. Left Emissary Jean and Blood Dragon, right emissary, understood that they were just passing by the Raging Flame divine country. If there were no special circumstances, there was no need to stay. As for Ji Tianxing, after answering this question, he entered a secret room. He took out the Jiuqian 10 Absolute's tower and placed it on the stone table in the secret room. Then, he entered the distorted space-time of the divine tower and flew toward the depths of space-time. Just now, Yin Yao had used her divine will to call him and ask him to quickly enter the distorted space-time, as there was something important. Therefore, Ji Tianxing did not delay and hurried over to check the situation. Swoosh! Soon, he flew into the depths of the distorted space-time. Still far away, he saw a huge blood-colored divine flame rising fiercely in the space-time. He was very observant and immediately sensed that something was wrong. The power of the bloody flame's sacred tree seems to have recovered to its peak and even strengthened a bit. What's going on? It shouldn't be. Full of doubts, he sped up and flew under the bloody flame sacred tree. Yun Yao, who was wearing a white dress, was standing under the sacred tree and observing the sacred tree. Sensing Ji Tianxing's arrival, she retracted her gaze and turned to look at Ji Tianxing. Tianxing, come and see what's going on. Ji Tianxing quickly flew to her side and asked, Yao Yao, what happened? Yun Yao pointed at the blood flame sacred tree and explained, not long ago, right after I finished my seclusion, I noticed something strange about this sacred tree. Previously, its power was a little weak, and its blood flames were also dormant. But now, its power seems to have recovered, and its divine flames are surging violently. After saying that, she flew to the top of the tree with Ji Tianxing and pointed at a cluster of lush branches. Look over there. I clearly remember that the tree was bare, without any leaves or fruits, but the branches actually sprouted. Ji Tianxing looked in the direction she was pointing. Sure enough, he saw 3 light purple sprouts growing out of the bare dark red branches. He looked in another direction, and soon discovered that a few clusters of branches had sprouted light purple buds. The aura of the blood flame sacred tree was no longer as dormant as before. It was actually full of vitality and thriving. Even Ji Tianxing was surprised by this discovery. Why would the blood flame sacred tree recover its power and sprout sprouts for no reason? Yao Yao, have you done anything to the sacred tree? Yun Yao naturally shook her head. She pointed at the space around the sacred tree and said, all this time, Kowushuang, White Dragon, Qianyu, and Black Dragon have been cultivating around this sacred tree. Other than absorbing the power of the sacred tree, we haven't done anything else. Even the divine fruit you gave us, we have been treasuring it, and we haven't refined it yet. Ji Tianxing frowned and pondered. He said, logically speaking, you have been absorbing the power of the sacred tree. It has been twisting the space-time and can't replenish its power, so it shouldn't have recovered. There must be a reason why it has absorbed a large amount of divine power. That's why it became like this. Yun Yao reminded him, we have been cultivating here all this time and haven't done anything. You, on the other hand, think carefully. Did you do something? Hearing her words, Ji Tianxing had a flash of inspiration. He vaguely guessed the answer. Understand now. Previously, I had been fighting. First, I killed more than 1,000 people of the Sacred Fire sect, and then more than 1,000 people of the Surging Waves Palace. The bloody flame divine tree must have absorbed the powerful blood energy and divine power released by the death of the 3,000 godly spirits. Yun Yao was startled. She nodded in agreement and said, yes, your analysis is very reasonable. The blood flame sacred tree was condensed from the blood and souls of millions of soldiers. It is a spiritual quasi-king level sacred tree. It is natural that it would take the initiative to absorb the power of the bloodline and soul. After a pause, she frowned and asked, for the past 10,000 years, the blood flame sacred tree has been in the blood flame's secret realm. Have you ever heard that it can absorb the power of the bloodline and soul to continue growing? Ji Tianxing shook his head and said, I haven't. It seems that everyone thinks that the blood flame sacred tree won't grow anymore. But what is suspicious is that when the blood flame sacred tree first appeared 10,000 years ago, it was only 10,000 feet tall. But now, the blood flame sacred tree is 10,000 feet tall. This means that it is still slowly growing 10 times. Yun Yao nodded slightly and said thoughtfully, Tianxing, these are all our guesses. We can't be sure yet. The next time you fight, pay attention to the blood flame sacred tree and you will know the answer. Also, if the sacred tree is placed in the distorted space and time, it will absorb the power of the bloodline and soul. The divine tower will be a hindrance. If we move the sacred tree outside of the divine tower, it may be able to absorb more bloodline and soul power. Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded. Yes, this is a good suggestion. I will try to refine the sacred tree. When I can control it freely, I will move it out of the divine tower. This matter was decided. Ji Tianxing just noticed that Yun Yao's strength had increased again. How long has it been since we last met? Yao Yao, You have broken through to the second level of the divine monarch realm? Ji Tianqing looked at her with shining eyes, and his face was full of surprise. Yun Yao nodded slightly and explained, Ku and I have benefited a lot from the previous battles. When we are in seclusion here, we have an endless supply of divine stones and origin stones. We can also absorb the power of the blood flame sacred tree. If we can't break through under such favorable conditions, then we are the reincarnation of the divine monarch in vain. Also, to break through the shackles from the heavenly god realm to the divine monarch realm is extremely difficult. Once we break through to the divine monarch realm, our future cultivation will be smooth. At this point, Ji Tianqing thought of something more important and asked with concern, Oh right, Yao Yao, now that you have reached the divine monarch realm, how much of your soul's memory have you recovered? Yin Yao obviously knew that he was referring to Goddess Yaowan's memory. Her eyes dimmed, and she said with disappointment, I have only recovered about 80%. Most of them are trivial matters, and there are many divine arts and secret arts. The most important information and experiences are in the last 20% of my memory. I think it is because I have only merged with 6 divine pearls that my memory is missing. Ji Tianqing nodded and comforted her. Don't worry. Even if I have to travel through the universe, I will help you find the last divine pearl and restore your memory. Chapter 31:22. Regarding Yun Yao's divine soul memories, searching for the last divine pearl, and the secrets of the shattering of the 5 elements world, falling from the main world to a low-level world, and the outcome of Kenshin's fall and the battle of gods 1,000 years ago, and the current situation of the god realm, including heading to the dragon realm, rescuing Ji Wuhan, and so on. All of these were pressured in Ji Tianqing's heart, waiting for him to reveal and execute them one by one. But these things could not be done overnight. It required a relatively long time, so there was no use in being anxious. He comforted Yin Yao with a few words and went to visit Ji Ku and Ji Wushuang's situation. Ji Ku was still in closed-door cultivation. Her strength had reached the limit of the first stage and was at the critical moment of breaking through to the second stage. Ji Tianqing believed that it would not take long for her to break through to the second stage of the divine monarch realm. As for Ji Wushuang, she was also wholeheartedly in closed-door cultivation. The incident that happened in the Bloodflame Kingdom's royal city previously made her feel guilty. She felt that her strength was not enough and implicated Zhen Hong and her father. After returning to the distorted space-time, she had been working hard to cultivate. The current her had long refined the divine fruit of the blood flame sacred tree and was at the peak of the 9th level of the celestial god realm. She was working hard to break through to the divine monarch realm. With abundant cultivation resources and the help of the blood flame divine fruit, breaking through to the divine monarch realm was a sure thing. At most half a year, at least a month, she would definitely break through. Ji Tianqing also went to visit White Dragon, Qianyu, and Black Dragon. There was no need to say much about their situation. They had suffered considerable injuries in the previous battle and were currently recuperating. Seeing that everyone's situation was fine, Ji Tianqing sat under the sacred tree with ease and also began to cultivate. He took out a blood flame divine fruit and used the devouring ability to slowly refine it. In a short half a month, he refined the divine fruit, and his divine power increased by several times. Naturally, his strength also reached the limit of the 6th stage. But he was not in a hurry to break through to the 7th level of the divine monarch realm. He took out many divine spark fragments and began to refine them one by one. He wanted to accumulate his strength to the limit before breaking through to the 7th stage. This way, the success rate was also extremely high. Soon, another 20 days had passed. Not only did he refine Sheng Wuyin and the other divine sovereign's quintessence fragments, but he also gained 12 new divine Tao laws. His ability had also reached the limit, just a sliver away from 7th stage realm. Now, he had 292 laws, and his strength had reached the limit. The divine power accumulated in his body was also surging violently. Hence, he borrowed a large amount of Godstone's and Origin Stone's energy to charge towards 7th Stage Realm. This process was rather long, but it was also the crucial moment for him to advance from a Middle Divine Lord to a High Divine Lord. Therefore, the seclusion this time was very important. Raging Flame Divine, Kingdom's royal city. Inside a resplendent palace, in a secret room that was filled with divine power, Yi Zichen's eyes lit up. Prince Lien, who was dressed in a black robe with a golden dragon pattern, was still sitting in the pool of 5-color divine liquid with his eyes closed. Now, after a few days of recuperation and consuming a large number of divine pills and elixirs, his injuries had recovered significantly. Not only had the wounds all over his body healed, but the scars had also faded. Even the injuries to his internal organs, bones, and meridians had mostly recovered. Only the injuries to his divine soul were more troublesome, and he still needed a long time to recover. At this moment, the door to the secret room lit up with a golden light and a soft sound. Obviously, Lien Air, who was guarding outside the door of the secret room, had something important to report. Prince Lien temporarily stopped his cultivation and slowly opened his eyes. It's all thanks to the healing pills Chang'e sent that I was able to recover so quickly. At this rate, I'll be fully recovered in half a year at most. Prince Lien lowered his head and looked at himself, muttering to himself. Then, he raised his hand and sent out a beam of golden light, opening the door to the secret room. A tall divine race member wearing golden armor and a helmet entered the secret room with his head lowered. He was the Lien Heir. He quickly walked to the pool of divine liquid and bowed respectfully. Although his expression was a little strange and his eyes were a little dim, Prince Lien didn't think much of it. He just assumed that his injuries hadn't healed yet, which was why he looked like this. After all, he had attacked the Lien Heir in a fit of rage and was severely injured. Lien Heir, what's the matter? Prince Lien looked at the Lien Heir expressionlessly and asked. The Lien Heir lowered his head even more and said in a low voice, Your Highness, this subordinate has just received news from the Cloud Sect. It's bad news. After the lesson last time, the Lien Heir had learned to be smart. He was determined not to let Prince Lien make wild guesses and had to give an answer first. Otherwise, Prince Lien would fly into a rage after losing face, and he would be injured. This move was indeed effective. Prince Lien immediately frowned. His expression turned gloomy, and a chill emanated from his body. Didn't I have the Cloud Sect's spies and scouts keep an eye on the border and the God-burying mountain range? The bad news you speak of, could it be that the surging water palace and the sacred fire sect's operation failed? They couldn't stop Tianxing and let that bastard escape into the raging flame divine nation? It was obvious. Prince Lien had long since anticipated this possibility and had mentally prepared himself. He already had a sufficient understanding of Ji Tianxing's strength and methods, and paid enough attention to them. This was already the worst result he could accept. Unexpectedly, the Lien Heir still shook his head and said in a trembling voice, Your Highness, not only did the Sacred Fire Sect and the Surging Water Palace fail their mission, but they were also killed. What? The sudden bad news caused Prince Lien's expression to change. He jumped to his feet. His expression became extremely gloomy and even a little ferocious. His widened eyes were filled with shock and disbelief. After a long silence, his anger gradually subsided and he gradually calmed down. Lien Heir, tell me in detail. What are the exact casualties? Until now, he was still hoping that the Sacred Fire Sect and the Surging Water Palace had only suffered heavy losses. Perhaps Sheng Wuyin, the master of the Surging Water Palace, and the others could survive. However, the Lien Heir's answer completely extinguished his last shred of hope. Your Highness, the Cloud Sect spies saw with their own eyes that the Surging Water Palace's experts self-destructed and destroyed everything within a radius of 100,000 miles. A desert appeared in the God-burying mountain range. It was like a huge sinkhole. Not a single blade of grass grew, and no traces were left. Furthermore, the 3,100 people from the Sacred Fire Sect and the Surging Water Palace were all killed. Prince Lien's vision darkened when he heard that. His blood boiled again, and his chest heaved violently. How could this be? That's impossible. There were more than 3,100 people from the two major sects combined. There were also more than 10 upper-level divine lords. How could they all be killed in a single night? That's right, the people from the surging water palace self-destructed. They wanted to die together with Tianxing. Even if that bastard was lucky enough to survive, he must be severely injured. His companions should all be dead, right? The Lian heir was silent for a moment before saying in a sorrowful tone, "Your Highness, that's not the case." The Cloud Sect spies were secretly watching and saw that the divine worship they were on left the god-burying mountain range and entered the kingdom of gods. Sword breaking the 9 heavens. Chapter 31:23. Prince Lian was stunned once again. Even his strength seemed to have been sucked out of him as he slumped into the divine liquid pool. Splash! The 5-color divine liquid splashed out, creating waves in the pool. Prince Lian was silent for a long time before he laughed in anger. "Ha ha ha!" he muttered to himself. The Sacred Fire Sect and the surging wave palace were completely annihilated. But he survived, and with his companions, he swaggered into the raging flames divine kingdom on a divine ship. "He's humiliating me. This damned beast is arrogant, conceited, and lawless, but I can't do anything to him. Once, twice, thrice I've lost to him again and again. I don't know how many times I've been defeated. Why? Why does Hao Yin care for him so much? Why is it that none of my subordinates are able to kill him?" Prince Lian roared as if he had gone mad. His body ignited with a bloody flame that boiled and evaporated the divine liquid in the pool. The Lian heir was intimidated by his anger and murderous aura. He took a few steps back and knelt on the ground, trembling. He had followed Prince Lian for many years and had always been one of the prince's most trusted aides. Even the prince had always been a calm and collected person. He was even a little feminine and gentle. This was the second time he had seen Prince Lian so angry and irritable. He had lost his composure like a savage beast. The first time Prince Lian lost his composure was when his brother and mother were killed by the emperor, and he couldn't do anything about it. How could the Lian heir not panic when the same thing happened again? He was afraid that Prince Lian would lose control and kill him. Prince Lian continued to roar and roar. His anger and murderous aura did not weaken at all. The Lian heir tried to persuade him. "Please calm down, Your Highness. You're still injured. Please don't hurt yourself." Prince Lian ignored him and continued to roar. His eyes were still bloodshot and dark red. The Lian heir continued. "Your Highness, you still have a few trump cards in your hands. The Sacred Fire Sect and the Surging Wave Palace may be your lackeys, but they're still at the bottom. Even when you sent them to the border to intercept them, you only treated them as cannon fodder. Even if the Sacred Fire Sect and the Surging Waves Palace were destroyed, wasn't that within your expectations? Moreover, the people of the Surging Waves Palace were loyal and brave. They would rather self-destruct than surrender. Even if they didn't kill Tianxing, at least they taught Tianxing a painful lesson." Hearing this, Prince Lian's anger subsided a little. Seeing that it was effective, Lian heir continued to persuade him. Furthermore, the destruction of the Sacred Fire Sect and the Surging Waves Palace can only be blamed on them for acting on their own accord. It's not that your strategy wasn't brilliant enough. You can have them guard the border and join forces to besiege Tianxing and the others, or surround them without attacking. However, the Sacred Fire Sect was eager to gain merit. They left the border without permission and entered the god-burying mountain range to search for Tianxing and the others. The Palace of Surging Waves wants to take advantage of the situation and take advantage of the situation. Lian heir told Prince Lian in detail about the news sent by the Flying Cloud Sect. After hearing this, Grand Prince Lian calmed down. His shame and anger lessened a lot. "I see." His face was ferocious as he sneered. "I've ordered the Sacred Fire Sect and the Surging Waves Palace to form a formation at the border and join forces to stop that bastard Tianxing." This was something that was in the bag, something that he was confident of. Even if the Sacred Fire Sect and the Surging Waves Palace are trash and can't kill Tianxing, they can at least trap him. How can such a mature and stable plan fail? It turned out that it was them who ignored my words and caused such a disaster. This group of bastards who deserve to die by 1,000 cuts, they only have themselves to blame. They can't do anything right, but they're good at ruining things. Clearly, Prince Lien blamed the failure of the plan on the Sacred Fire sect and the Surging Waves Palace. As a result, the frustration in his heart lessened a lot. The anger and humiliation of losing to Ji Tianxing also lessened by more than half. Seeing that Prince Lien had calmed down, Lien Heir secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He quickly asked, "Your Highness, the Flying Cloud sect followed your orders and sent out all their spies to the north of the kingdom. They're only responsible for tracking and won't attack without permission. As of now, the whereabouts of Tianxing's group are under their control." Prince Lien felt a little comforted and nodded approvingly. That old man Ye Feiyun is more sensible. He follows my orders and won't act without permission. Where is that little bastard now? The Lien Heir bowed and reported, "After the divine ship left the God-burying mountain range, it flew straight south without stopping. 15 minutes ago, the Flying Cloud sect spies reported that the divine ship has arrived at the Flowing Wind region's Mountain Wind City." Prince Lien frowned and sneered. All the way south, after passing through the Flowing Wind region and 5 more regions, it will reach the Raging Flames Royal City. Could it be that he guessed that I'm in the Bloody Flames Royal City and came for me? Does he want to repeat the scene at the Bloody Flames Royal City and kill me in front of the kingdom's citizens and experts? The Lien Heir immediately flattered. The Bloody Flames Royal City is like a prince's palace, gathering all the experts of the kingdom. How could that brat barge in? Your Highness has already laid down an inescapable net. As long as that brat dares to come, he will definitely die without a burial place. Prince Lien nodded slightly. Pass down the order. Have the Flying Cloud sect continue to follow and monitor that divine ship. If they can find out the brat's injuries and the casualties of his companions, I will reward them handsomely. In addition, have the elites of the Myriad Flow sect, the Divine Blade Union, and the other 7 sects gather in the south. My inescapable net will tighten step by step. Finally, I will crush that brat outside the Raging Flames Royal City. The Lien Heir cupped his hands and acknowledged the order. He then asked, "Your Highness, will the people of the He Tian sect's Raging Flames branch move together with the other 9 sects or stay in the Royal City and await orders?" Prince Lien thought for a moment and said in a deep voice, "The people of the Raging Flames branch are one of my 2 trump cards. Currently, we have not reached the stage of closing the net, so they do not need to move out. They just need to conserve their energy. This subordinate understands." The Lien Heir nodded and stood in silence. Prince Lien pondered for a moment and asked, "Is there any news from the royal city? The emperor should know about the matter of the Bloody Flames divine kingdom." What was his reaction? The Lien Heir shook his head. Several sirs have already reported, but the emperor did not have much of a reaction. He only reprimanded you a few times in the royal court, saying that you did not manage the country well and that you still have a lot to learn and experience. Everyone in the royal court knows that the emperor wants you to stay outside and never return to the royal city. Ha! Prince Lien revealed a sinister smile and said in a low voice, "Sooner or later, I will go back and trample on his face in front of everyone. Then I will talk about brotherhood with him, right? Is there any news from the Green Jade Palace? It has been 9 years since the ruins were discovered. Why is the progress still so slow?" Mobile version of the website. Chapter 3124. At the mention of the Green Jade Palace, Lien Heir's expression and gaze became much more solemn. Want for look, whole. Edition, please, 100 do search because he knew very well that this was what His Highness cared about the most. After all, the Green Jade Palace was a relic from 10,000 years ago. After many investigations in the Great Yin Empire and countless historical records and legends, they came to a conclusion. It was very likely that the owner of that ruin was the famous god King Azure Jade, who had walked out of the Great Yin Empire 10,000 years ago. Even though the Azure Jade Divine King had long disappeared, it was unknown whether he was in seclusion or had left the Northern Heaven region. However, It was an indisputable fact that celestial King Azure Jade had made his name in the Great Yin Empire and had lived in the Great Yin Empire for more than 3,000 years. The various factions of the Great Yin Empire believed that the Green Jade Palace was the cave abode of the Green Jade Supreme Being in the Great Yin Empire. There must be a heaven-shaking treasure hidden inside. King-level weapons and medicines, as well as king-level techniques and secret magics, were all supreme treasures. Taking a step back, even if the Green Jade Palace did not have these things, only God King Azure Jade's cultivation experience, his insights when creating divine powers were treasures that countless divine lords yearned for even in their dreams, especially those 9th-stage realm peak God monarchs. If he could read God King Green Jade's cultivation insights and experience, he would have a greater chance of breaking through to the God King realm. The appearance of the Green Jade Palace had caused a huge commotion in the Great Yin Empire. Almost all the peak divine lords and top factions were determined to explore the Azure Jade Divine Palace and get a share of the loot. Even if the royal family of the Great Yin Empire took over the Green Jade Palace, they would not be able to intimidate the other factions and experts. Moreover, the Great Yin Emperor's actions had angered the public. Dozens of top forces from the empires and the various divine kingdoms had joined forces to rebel against the imperial family. In the end, as the situation worsened, Great Yan's emperor had no choice but to compromise and give in to stabilize the situation. With Great Yan's imperial family as the leader, they worked together with the 49 top factions to research and explore the Verdant Jade Palace. These 50 forces formed an alliance and worked together to keep the secret and seal off any news about the Green Jade Palace. All research and exploration activities were carried out in secret, and very few people knew about them. Unfortunately, the Green Jade Palace was too powerful and mysterious. There were king-level divine arrays everywhere. After 9 years of research, the 50 forces had only managed to decipher a few outer divine arrays. They hadn't even seen the entrance of the Green Jade Palace. Prince Lian's Etienne sect was one of the biggest sects in the Great Yin Empire. Naturally, it was one of the 50 sections. Therefore, he was determined to obtain the Green Jade Palace. He had fantasized more than once about the opening of the gates of the Green Jade Palace. He would definitely be able to represent the Etienne sect and enter the Divine Palace to search for treasures. If he could obtain a King Grey Divine Artifact, or God King Green Jade's cultivation experience, and inheritance, he would have a greater chance of breaking through to the God King realm. Once he became the deity king, the entire history of the Great Yin Empire would be rewritten. When the time came, he would return to the imperial capital and kill the Great Yin Emperor in front of everyone to avenge his brother and mother. The entire Great Yin Empire would fall into his hands. Without a doubt, the Green Jade Palace was the opportunity for him to take revenge and seize the throne. It was also the greatest opportunity of his life. The Lian heir bowed respectfully and reported through voice transmission. "Your Highness, the Vice Sect Master sent word yesterday that there's been progress in the Green Jade Palace. The 12 sects have joined forces and cracked another King Grey Divine formation outside the ruins. They're one step closer to the Divine Palace's entrance. It's estimated that they'll reach the main entrance in 2 to 3 years." Prince Lian nodded to show that he understood. He waved his hand and said, "The progress in the Green Jade Palace is very slow. It won't be seen in 3 to 5 years. There's no need to pay attention to it in the short term. I have to solve the problem at hand first. You may go and pass on the order." "Yes, Your Highness." The Lian heir bowed and left the secret chamber to pass on the order. Before long, Prince Lian's order was passed on to the 9 sects and factions. Therefore, the various factions quickly moved and began to gather in the south to tighten their defense. Everyone knew that the young prince wanted to complete the final encirclement outside the raging flame capital and deal the fatal blow to Tianqing. The scorching sun was high in the sky in Skyfire County. A ferocious-looking pitch-black divine ship was flying above the vast sea of clouds, heading south as fast as lightning. This was Lin Shui's ship. Left emissary Jean and Blood Dragon, right emissary, were still driving the divine ship with full concentration. It had been 20 days since the divine ship entered the raging flame divine country. During this time, left emissary Jean and Blood Dragon took turns to heal their injuries. Their injuries had mostly recovered. At this time, the two were discussing in low voices. Blood Dragon, the more I think about it, the stranger it is. We caused such a big commotion in the god-burying mountain range. Prince Lien must be mad, right? It's reasonable to say that he would gather a large number of troops and desperately encircle us, right? But since we entered the raging flame divine country, it's been calm. It's been 20 days, and no one has come to intercept us. Isn't this too strange? What is Prince Lien trying to do? Left emissary Jean frowned with a puzzled expression. Blood Dragon, right emissary thought for a moment and chuckled. Perhaps we're too fast, and even the prince's men can't catch up to us? Or they didn't find any trace of us? That's impossible, right? Left emissary Jean subconsciously shook his head. The divine ship is very fast, but there are many forces under Prince Lien. There will always be someone who can find us. Blood Dragon, right emissary smiled. Maybe the destruction of the Sacred Fire sect and the Surging Wave Palace was too big a blow to Prince Lien, making him completely terrified and not dare to deal with us anymore. Or maybe he was so angry that his injuries suddenly worsened and he couldn't keep his life. Left emissary Jean glanced at him with a strange expression. Are you serious? Huh. Blood Dragon, right emissary chuckled. Of course not. What is Prince Lien's identity? How could he be hit by such a setback? I reckon that he must be mad with shame after losing to young Master Tianxing so many times in a row. Now that he has suffered a big loss and learned his lesson, he definitely won't dare to make a move easily. He might be planning an even bigger conspiracy and gathering the strongest forces to give us a fatal blow. Left emissary Jean hurriedly nodded in agreement. That's right, I think so too. Therefore, not only can't we relax our guard, we have to be even more vigilant. In several secret chambers of the divine ship, Lin Shui, Zhen Hong, and the rest were still cultivating and recuperating. In Ji Tianxing's secret chamber, the divine pagoda was still placed on the stone table. He sat upright in the distorted space-time of the divine pagoda and cultivated under the blood flame sacred tree. At this time, he was currently at the final juncture of breaking through to the 7th level divine lord realm. Golden light radiated from all over his body, fluctuating with a powerful and mighty divine power aura. After a full 18 hours, he suddenly ignited with golden divine flames, turning into a golden divine dragon that soared into the sky. Boom! Following a loud bang like muffled thunder, he finally broke through the shackles and obstacles, successfully breaking through to the 7th level divine lord realm. Sword breaking the 9 heavens. Chapter 31:25. An incomparably vigorous and imposing aura spread out in all directions. Ji Tianxing was like the sun, blooming with the most dazzling golden light, illuminating a radius of 10,000 miles. The divine power in his body was also surging violently, giving off a dull sound of wind and thunder. From this moment onwards, he was a 7th degree realm upper-level divine lord. Compared to before, not only had his strength increased by several times, his realm and foundation had also become more vigorous. After all, he had condensed 292 types of divine Tao laws and had mastered all kinds of divine abilities and secret skills. Such a strength and foundation was comparable to a 1st or 2nd level divine king realm expert. The wind and thunder surged for 3 days before the divine power and divine blood in Ji Tianxing's body gradually calmed down. The golden divine dragon hovering in the sky and the dazzling golden light that illuminated a radius of 10,000 miles also gradually dissipated. At this moment, he finally ended his cultivation and opened his eyes. I've finally broken through to the 7th degree realm. I'm one step closer to recovering to the divine king realm. Ji Tianxing's eyes flashed with lightning as he muttered to himself calmly. At this moment, Yin Yao and Ji Ke flew over and congratulated him joyfully. Tianxing, you've finally broken through successfully. Brother Tianxing, from today onwards, you're an upper-level divine lord. I reckon that under the divine king realm, almost no one is your match, right? Obviously, the commotion caused by Ji Tianxing's breakthrough was too great, so it woke up Yin Yao and Ji Ke, who were cultivating. The two of them had come to his side long ago and did not disturb him. It was only until he completed his breakthrough and ended his cultivation that the two of them dared to show themselves. Ji Tianxing looked at the two of them gently. After sizing up Ji Ke, he revealed a gratified expression. Ke, you've also broken through to the second-level divine, Lord Realm? Ji Ke nodded and said with some shame, speaking of which, eldest senior sister and I went into seclusion at the same time, but she broke through 2 years earlier than me. My talent and aptitude are still inferior to eldest senior sister. Yin Yao smiled and shook her head gently to comfort Ji Ke. Ji Tianxing also explained, Ke, you don't have to worry about this. Yao Yao had fused with 6 god pearls, which was equivalent to the reincarnation of goddess Yaoguang. What she cultivated was the secret arts of her previous life, so of course she would be unimpeded. You, on the other hand, have inherited the legacy of the divine bird phoenix. You have the talent and aptitude to become a divine king. However, you're not the reincarnation of the phoenix after all. You still need to study and comprehend all kinds of divine abilities and ultimate arts. Naturally, it will take more time. Obviously, this was the fundamental difference between Yin Yao and Ji Ke. After hearing his explanation, Ji Ke was finally relieved. After the three of them chatted for a while, Yin Yao asked with concern, Tianxing, where are we now? Is everyone in danger? Ji Tianxing playfully said, when we were in the god-varying mountain range, we exterminated 2 of Grand Prince Lian's minions, causing a great commotion. Now that we are heading south, we are in the raging flame divine kingdom. However, we have been safe and sound all this time. The situation is just as I expected. Grand Prince Lian has been defeated repeatedly, so he doesn't dare to act rashly anymore. However, he must have set up an inescapable net in the dark, waiting for the critical moment to give us a fatal blow. Ji Ke frowned and asked worriedly, Big Brother Tianxing, since you know that Grand Prince Lian is very powerful, he must have set up an inescapable net in the raging flame divine kingdom. So are we still going south? Why don't we change our direction and avoid Grand Prince Lian's ambush or hide? Yin Yao had the same question. She knew Ji Tianxing well. He was not someone who would cause trouble for no reason. If they could avoid Grand Prince Lian's ambush, they would be able to reduce unnecessary trouble and danger. Since he insisted on heading south and did not hide, there must be a reason. As expected, Ji Tianxing explained, Grand Prince Lian and I are irreconcilable enemies. Even if I am willing to forgive him, he will not let me go. As long as he is alive, he will not stop his revenge. My destination is the imperial capital of the great Yin Empire. The other divine kingdoms are too weak. They don't know much about the Northern Heaven region, let alone the boundless Heaven continent. I can only find the answer in the great Yin Empire's capital. However, Grand Prince Lian's identity is special. He comes from the great Yin Empire's capital and has forces and claws in several divine kingdoms. If I don't deal with him in the Raging Flame divine kingdom, he will still take revenge when I reach the great Yin Empire's capital. Yin Yao and Ji Ke understood immediately. Ji Tianxing did not hide because he wanted to get rid of Grand Prince Lian as soon as possible. He did not want Grand Prince Lian to pester him when he reached the great Yin Empire's capital in the future. All right, you two continue to cultivate. I'll go check out the situation outside. It has been so long. Grand Prince Lian should have made his move. Also, I have to find a chance to fight and see if the Bloody Flame Sacred Tree will grow because of this. After that, Yin Yao and Ji Ke stayed in the distorted space-time and continued to cultivate in seclusion. Ji Tianxing left the Divine Tower. Swoosh! A white light flashed, and Ji Tianxing appeared in the secret chamber. He put away the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda and stepped out of the secret chamber. The meeting hall was empty. Lin Shui, Shui Huan, Zhan Hong, and the others were still in seclusion to heal and cultivate. Hence, Ji Tianxing went to the control room of the divine worship. Left emissary Jean and right emissary Blood Dragon were driving the divine worship and chatting in low voices. When they saw Ji Tianxing, they were shocked and quickly stood up to salute him. Ji Tianxing waved his hand, gesturing for them to dispense with the formalities, and asked, "Where are we now? Did you find anything unusual during this time?" Left emissary Jean quickly reported, "Young master, we are in the southern part of the Sky Fire County, in the Sky Fire Lake region. From the map, this region has a radius of 50 million miles, and there are thousands of lakes of various sizes scattered around. Other than the lakes, there are also swamps and jungles. This is the forbidden area of the Sky Fire County, and there are many powerful divine beasts and demon beasts here." Left emissary Jean briefly introduced the location and the basic situation of the Sky Fire Lake region. Blood Dragon, right emissary added, "Since we entered the Raging Flame Divine Country, Grand Prince Lien has ceased all activities and hasn't launched a sneak attack. During this time, apart from encountering attacks from divine beasts and vicious beasts, there have been no abnormalities." Ji Tianxing didn't say anything. He sat on the divine jade chair and closed his eyes in silence for a long time. Left emissary Jean and right emissary Blood Dragon sensed that he was releasing a powerful, invisible divine sense to explore the situation within a radius of tens of thousands of miles. An invisible pressure also caused the two of them to be secretly surprised and feel reverence in their hearts. The two looked at each other and secretly transmitted their voices. "Old Jean, do you feel that young Master Tianxing seems to have become stronger again?" "Nonsense, how could I not feel it? I bet that young Master Tianxing definitely made a breakthrough during the seclusion. It can't be, right? He has only been in seclusion for 20 days, and he made another breakthrough? Isn't this too unreal? How could there be such a monstrous god in this world? Hee, is young Master an ordinary god? Young Master's previous strength was already very powerful. Now that he has made another breakthrough, Grand Prince Lien is completely done for." Chapter 31:26. Just as left emissary Jean and Blood Dragon, right emissary, were communicating via voice transmission, Ji Tianxing opened his eyes. He glanced at the two of them and sighed softly. "It seems that I have to teach you two a few detection skills." Sigh. Left emissary Jean was overjoyed and exclaimed with an excited expression of disbelief, "Really? Thank you for your guidance, young master." He thought to himself, "How powerful is young Master Tianxing? Just a few skills can benefit me for the rest of my life. This is simply a pleasant surprise, a great opportunity." Blood Dragon right emissary was also full of excitement and joy, but he quickly calmed down. Thinking that Ji Tianxing's words had a hidden meaning, he grabbed the excited left emissary Jean. "Cough, cough. Old Jean, don't be excited. Young Master has something to say." Left emissary Jean calmed down and looked at Ji Tianxing with burning eyes. "Young Master, please speak." Ji Tianxing shook his head with a chuckle and said, "Let Blood Dragon explain to you." Left emissary Jean vaguely understood something and turned to look at Blood Dragon, right emissary. Blood Dragon, right emissary, said awkwardly, "Young Master means that we are being followed, but we haven't been able to find anything unusual." Left emissary Jean suddenly understood, and his face was also full of embarrassment. He smiled and said, "Young Master, our strength is low, and we didn't find anything unusual in time. We almost made a big mistake." After that, he said seriously, "Young Master, where are the people who followed us? They must be very strong, right? Since we have found them, let's attack decisively and kill them." Ji Tianxing said calmly, "They're to our side, in the southeast direction. There are only two of them, both middle-level divine lords, and they're a little weaker than you." Left emissary Jean and Blood Dragon, right emissary, fell silent, feeling more and more embarrassed. If the other party was stronger than them, it was understandable that they didn't notice them. But the other party was weaker than them, and they didn't notice anything unusual. This shouldn't be. But the two of them asked themselves, They had been vigilant during this period of time and did not neglect their duties. Seeing the self-blame in their eyes, Ji Tianxing comforted them. You don't have to blame yourselves too much. Those two middle divine lords have mastered a profound concealment divine ability. They should be the forces under Prince Lian's command that were responsible for investigating and gathering information. Now, I'll teach you a detection divine ability. Go to the secret chamber and study it well. After that, he waved his hand and shot out 2 balls of 5-color divine light, which flew in front of the left emissary Jin and the right emissary of the blood dragon. The 2 of them did not immediately accept the divine light. Instead, they asked curiously, "Young master, if we go to the secret room to cultivate in seclusion, who will pilot the divine warship?" "Young master, aren't we going to deal with the 2 fellows following us as soon as possible?" Ji Tianxing waved his hand and explained, "Don't worry and go cultivate. I have my own arrangements." The 2 of them immediately understood that Ji Tianxing wanted to control the divine battleship. Furthermore, he was going to personally take care of those 2 middle divine lords. The left emissary Jin and the blood dragon right emissary were relieved. They each took the 5-color divine light in front of them and entered the secret chamber to cultivate. Ji Tianxing took control of the divine battleship. He easily steered the divine battleship, maintaining its direction and speed as it flew south at a moderate pace. He secretly released his divine sense to observe the 2 divine lords in the southeast direction. They were 2 skinny middle-aged divine clan members wearing white robes. Their hairstyles and appearances were somewhat similar. They could be brothers, or they could be father and son. Both of them were 5th-level divine lords, but they relied on special divine abilities to conceal their auras. Moreover, the 2 of them merged with the white sea of clouds and flashed like phantoms. They were actually able to keep up with the speed of the divine battleship. After confirming that there were no other people following them within a radius of 30,000 miles, Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a sneer. He began to move. Under his control, the divine battleship that was flying smoothly suddenly shook a few times. Then, it desperately accelerated and flew south without regard for anything else. The 2 divine lords who were secretly following them were stunned when they suddenly saw this scene. Immediately, their expressions changed and they sent a voice transmission to warn, "Not good. We've been discovered. Quickly, Chase. We can't let that divine battleship escape. Quickly send a message to the sect master and let the others join forces to intercept. This is the heavenly fire dual lake. Once the divine battleship escapes, it'll be very hard to find it again." Hence, the 2 divine lords did not care about hiding anymore and desperately accelerated to chase after the divine battleship. At the same time, a divine lord sent out a communication jade slip to report the situation to the sect master and request for the others' assistance. Time trickled by. The 2 divine lords were indeed formidable. No matter how fast the divine battleship was, they kept on following closely and were not shaken off. Even though their divine power was greatly depleted and their whereabouts were completely exposed. But they were very excited and agitated in their hearts, because they understood that when that divine battleship fled desperately, it proved that the people inside the divine battleship had a guilty conscience and were afraid of being intercepted. This also proved that the people inside the divine battleship were all seriously injured and had not recovered until now. Furthermore, the sect master also sent back a communication jade slip, expressing his approval of their actions. The sect master also issued an order to let the other 8 teams and 500 elite disciples form an encirclement around the heavenly fire dual lake. After a few hours at most, the encirclement would close in and complete the encirclement. At that time, Tianxing and the others would be like turtles in a jar. They would also be able to complete Prince Lian's mission of probing the situation of Tianxing and the others. If Tianxing and the others were seriously injured, then they would have made a great contribution. Prince Lian would definitely turn out in full force and take advantage of the situation to kill Ji, Tianxing, and the others. Even if Tianxing and the others were not injured, their combat power would still be formidable. They would not fight head-on and would retreat after probing for a while. Of course, from the divine battleship's reaction, Tianxing and the others were definitely not in good condition. If they were in peak condition, why would they speed up and escape after discovering that they were being followed? They would definitely attack aggressively and kill the two divine lords on the spot. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours had passed. The two divine lords gave it their all and followed behind the divine battleship from the beginning to the end, keeping the distance within 500 kilometers. Both of them were so tired that they were panting. They were completely exhausted. However, when they saw that the divine battleship's flames were weakening and its speed was getting slower and slower, they could only grit their teeth and persevere. Hold on a little longer. The encirclement will close soon. Yes, the other 8 teams and 500 elite disciples are almost here. The sect master is also here personally. As expected, another hour later, the encirclement was finally closed. Dazzling divine light appeared in front of the divine battleship, to the left and to the right. At least 4 teams and 8 middle-level divine lords had rushed over. Above a lake with a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers, 10 divine lords had closed in on the divine battleship. And at this moment, the divine battleship appeared to be even more panicked. After circling in the sky once, it actually burst into resplendent flames and charged toward the southeast. From the looks of it, Tianxing and the others were going to use all their strength to break out of the encirclement. When the 10 divine lords saw this, they looked as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Their faces were filled with mocking smiles. Chapter 31:27. They had surrounded the divine battleship at the Heavenly Fire Lake to test the strength of Tianxing and the others. From the beginning to the end, the divine battleship's reaction had revealed one thing. The people in the divine battleship were very weak. They didn't have enough confidence and didn't want to fight head-on. They only wanted to escape from the pursuit. What this meant was self-evident. When the divine battleship rushed to the southeast, the 10 divine lords all looked smug and expectant. They immediately used their divine powers and joined forces to stop the divine battleship. Swoosh! Swoosh! Dozens of 1,000-foot-long sword radiances, saber radiances, and ice and fire shadows poured down like a flood, drowning the divine battleship. The 3 divine lords in the southeast took out their divine weapons like divine swords, sabers, cauldrons, and wheels and attacked the divine battleship. They didn't want to destroy the divine battleship, but they wanted to stop it and trap it there. Bam! 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 Boom! Boom! A deafening sound exploded above the sea of clouds and spread for thousands of miles. The divine battleship dodged more than half of the divine powers. They passed through the white sea of clouds and landed in the lake below. Instantly, a 1,000-foot-tall wave rose in the lake, splashing water that covered the sky. More than a dozen secret arts and divine artifacts hit the divine warship. The divine battleship was on the verge of collapsing and was sent flying dozens of miles away. The saber radiances and sword shadows also exploded, turning into thousands of divine light fragments and scattering in the sea of clouds. Seeing this, the 10 divine lords were even more certain that their opponents were at the end of their rope. They became more excited and expectant. They used all their divine powers and started another round of attacks. All kinds of saber radiances, sword radiances, divine powers, and divine weapons flew in the sky, chasing the divine battleship. Although the divine battleship didn't dare to face the attacks head-on, it could keep calm and avoid the attacks. Occasionally, there were attacks that it couldn't avoid, but the divine battleship relied on its strong defense to withstand them. Of course, after the two sides fought for a while, the divine battleship also started its counterattack. He continued to fire the divine cannons and shot out beams of divine power at the Sir Gods. The two sides fought above the lake, as if they had forgotten the passage of time. Very quickly, an hour passed. The divine warship was in a sorry state. The light shield on its surface was also flickering. It had been trying its best to block and avoid the attacks, and it tried to break out of the encirclement many times. However, its power was still lacking by a bit. He would always be stopped by the combined efforts of several divine lords at the crucial moment. Of course, in the eyes of the 10 Sir Gods, this was the result of them risking their lives, fighting a bloody battle, and risking their lives to stop him. After all, there were quite a few Sir Gods who had suffered serious injuries. Everyone's divine power was greatly depleted, and they were long exhausted. Meanwhile, raging flame royal city in a dazzling palace. Prince Lien was still sitting upright in the pool of divine liquid in the same secret room filled with divine light, recuperating from his injuries. At this time, the Lien heir came knocking again. The stone door of the secret room lit up and made a soft sound. Prince Lien stopped circulating his internal energy to treat his injuries. He opened his eyes and looked at the door, frowning in displeasure. He waved his hand and opened the stone door of the secret chamber. Lien heir quickly walked into the secret chamber. "What's the matter?" Prince Lien asked in a dignified tone. Lien heir bowed and saluted. He quickly reported. "Reporting to your highness, just now the Flying Cloud sect master sent a jade slip to report 2 pieces of good news." Prince Lien's eyes flashed, and his heartbeat sped up. He held his breath and asked, "Nie Feiyun? What good news could he have?" Although he guessed that it had something to do with Ji Tianxing, he was also looking forward to it. He had to remain calm and dignified, and not lose his composure. The Lien heir answered truthfully. An hour ago, the Flying Cloud sect master sent a message saying that the divine warship Tianxing was on discovered that the elders of the Flying Cloud sect were following it, so it sped up and fled. Those 2 elders chased for a few hours and tried their best to not be shaken off by the divine warship. The Flying Cloud sect master decisively ordered all the elders and elite disciples to surround the divine warship at the heavenly fire Lien Lake. Hearing this, Prince Lien frowned and coldly said with a dignified expression, "What kind of good news is this? Is that old bastard Nie Feiyun's brain flooded with water?" This prince repeatedly told him to keep an eye on that divine warship and keep track of its whereabouts. I didn't expect that in the end, he still went against this prince's orders and was so blinded by greed. Tianxing is so cunning. He obviously showed weakness and ran away. It must be a scheme. Prince Lien had suffered so many losses, and he hated Ji Tianxing to the bone, so he understood this very well. His first reaction was that this was a trap. The Lien heir saw that he was angry and hurriedly comforted him. "Prince, please calm down. How could the Flying Cloud sect master dare to go against your orders? He just wanted to share your burdens and carry out the mission you gave him before. He wanted to find out the real situation of Tianxing and the others." Prince Lien frowned and stopped criticizing him. He said in a low voice, "Continue. What's the second piece of good news?" The Lien heir sighed in relief and continued. "An hour ago, the 10 elders of the Flying Cloud sect finally surrounded the divine warship. At first, the divine warship was very anxious to break out of the encirclement. After failing to escape, the divine warship appeared calm and collected. It resisted the attacks of the 10 elders while looking for an opportunity to escape. It even looked for an opportunity to counterattack. After an hour of fighting, the divine warship's strength was greatly reduced, and the 10 elders were all injured. Prince Lien listened silently. After the Lien heir finished, he said calmly, "If the divine warship kept running away, it would be too fake. It must be a scheme. No matter how injured Tianxing and the others were, they wouldn't have been bullied by the 10 elders of the Flying Cloud sect." From the divine warship's reaction, they were indeed heavily injured. At first, it should have been Tianxing's companions controlling the divine warship. After being frightened, they only wanted to escape. Later, the divine warship calmed down and started to counterattack and break out of the encirclement in an orderly manner. It should have been Tianxing personally overseeing it. The Lien heir timely flattered, "Your Highness is indeed a divine strategist. You can plan a strategy from thousands of miles away." Prince Lien ignored his words and continued to ask, "What's Nie Feiyun's next plan? Has that bastard Tianxing shown himself? How are their injuries?" The Lien heir quickly answered, "According to the time, the Flying Cloud sect should have completed their encirclement. The Flying Cloud sect master personally led 20 elders and 500 elite disciples to attack the divine worship together. This is only to test the situation. If Tianxing and the others are weak, the Flying Cloud sect will have a chance to kill them. If Tianxing and the others are still stubborn, the Flying Cloud sect will retreat in time and continue to follow the divine worship. Prince Lian thought for a while and nodded. Nie Feiyun isn't too stupid. He knows when to advance and when to retreat. If he can find out the true situation of that bastard, it will be good news. This prince's encirclement plan can also be realized ahead of time. Pass down my orders to encourage Nie Feiyun. If he performs this service, this prince will reward him handsomely.